I'm a single guy in my mid-30s. This happened a few years ago during a somewhat depressing period in my life. I had just broken up with my girlfriend of 5 years, the girl I thought I'd be marrying one day and starting a family with. It's safe to say I was pretty lost at that time. I can't lie, the psychological damage of the breakup was pretty severe. I spent entire weeks sulking and forgetting to take care of myself. I'd wake up, talk to no one, go to work, talk to no one, and come home to spend the rest of the day in bed. The weekends were even worse. I'd forget to eat and I wouldn't leave the house. I'd binge watch movie after mind-numbing movie, not even realizing what I was watching half the time. But enough with the sob story. I'm much better now, although I still often think about the life I could have had if things went differently. Anyway, it was a Saturday night. I was slumped on the couch, barely moving except to hit play on another random movie. I couldn't even tell you what it was. Just another mindless action flick I'd forget about by the time it ended. For context, I was in my room, which is on the second floor of my house. I have a couch and a TV in my bedroom, so I typically never watch TV anywhere else but there. At one point, I looked down at my phone. It was a few minutes after 9 p.m. I remember that distinctly because my mom was calling me for like the 4th time that day. I didn't want to ignore her, but I let it ring out anyway. I knew she meant well, but I couldn't bring myself to talk. I didn't want to hear the usual questions about whether I'd eaten or gone outside. Eventually, I got tired of whatever was playing and backed out to the menu. I wasn't really in the mood for anything, but I clicked on some random horror movie I'd never heard of. It was one of those generic ones with a grainy thumbnail. I figured I'd half watch it until I fell asleep. About 20 minutes in, I realized the movie was even worse than I expected. The audio was a mess. Every time someone talked, I had to turn the volume way up just to catch a word or two. And then the next sound effect would blast through the speakers and damn near rupture my eardrums. For whatever reason though, I kept the movie on. I think it was just because I was too lazy to change it again. At some point, I started noticing this weird sound effect in the movie. It was this sharp, metallic clang, kind of like a pipe hitting concrete. It didn't match anything that was happening on the screen. No one was holding metal, and no one was in a warehouse or anything like that, and it wasn't timed with the scares either. It would just show up every minute or so, like the director had accidentally looped it or something. Same exact sound, same volume, and same pitch. It was almost too consistent to be a coherent sound design choice. That plus the fact that the rest of the audio was mixed so poorly made me question how the movie had even made it to streaming platforms. The poor quality of the movie actually made it harder to turn off, partly because I was enjoying criticizing it, but also partly because I needed to see how something so terrible would play out. About halfway through, I got up to use the bathroom, and for whatever reason, I actually paused the movie instead of not caring enough about what was going on. When I got back and sat down, I grabbed the remote and hovered over the play button, but right as I was about to press it, I heard that sound again. That same sharp metallic clang, except this time, the movie was paused. I froze for a second, just staring at the screen. No audio, no movement, but the sound had been clear as day, and it had come from somewhere inside the house. That's when it clicked. It had never been part of the movie. I stayed completely still, trying to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I watched the paused screen and just listened, hoping my mind had just been playing a trick on me. But then, about 45 seconds later, there it was again. The exact same clang. I didn't waste another second. I immediately jumped up, grabbed a knife from my desk, and started moving room to room, frantically checking every place someone could possibly be hiding. Every room in the house was clear though. There was no one. In fact, there were no signs that anything was out of place either. But as I walked back up the stairs with my heart still pounding, I heard the clang again. It wasn't as loud this time, meaning it must have been coming from my room, where I had been watching the movie. But I had been sitting there the whole time, so that didn't make any sense. That's when it hit me. I had a few windows open. It was spring, and the weather had finally started warming up, so I'd gotten into the habit of cracking them in the evenings to let some air in. I started thinking maybe the sound wasn't coming from inside the house at all. Maybe it had been coming from right outside the house this whole time. I don't know why, but that thought scared me even more. I went over to the window and pushed the curtain aside just enough to get a look at the backyard, and there it was. One of the deck chairs was sitting out in the middle of the lawn, maybe 20 feet from the house, and standing next to the chair was a kid, a young kid. I couldn't really make out any of his facial features given that it was so dark out, but the silhouette was way too small to be an adult. It was 100% a little kid. He was holding what looked like a PVC pipe, which explained the noise I had been hearing. He must have seen me, because as soon as I looked out the window, he smacked the pipe against the chair. I instantly stepped away from the window and felt my body start filling with fear. I know it sounds silly that I was afraid of something like that, but I couldn't fathom what that kid was doing outside my house. Did he have some kind of mental disorder? It didn't make sense. And then I thought about the fact that he must have been standing out there for nearly an hour, which freaked me out even more. I tried to slow my breathing and think rationally. Maybe the kid was lost. Maybe he had wandered off from a nearby house and didn't know how to get back. I told myself I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. So I went down the stairs and made my way through the house toward the back door, trying to keep calm. I even turned on the porch light, thinking it might help the kid feel less spooked, or at least give me a better look at him. As I was turning the doorknob, I froze. Something about it felt wrong, like I was walking into some kind of trap. If that kid were really lost, wouldn't he ring my doorbell or call out to me through my window? And even if he were too scared to, and ultimately decided that banging a pipe against one of my chairs was the best option, would he really stick to that strategy after a whole hour? It was insane. Something in my gut told me not to go outside, so I slowly backed away from the door. I crept over to a small window just left of the door, one that overlooked the porch and part of the backyard. I kept the light off behind me and slowly tilted the blind with 2 fingers, just enough to see through without drawing attention, and there they were. There were 2 men wearing all black, crouching below my back door, as if ready to ambush me the second I opened it. I must have stared too long, because one of the men suddenly turned his head and locked eyes with me through the glass. I dropped the blinds and instantly dialed 911. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard banging on the back door. Those guys were trying to break in. I sprinted to my bathroom and locked the door. By that point, I was having a full-on panic attack. I felt like I couldn't move. I was struggling to breathe, honestly. Shortly after I got to the bathroom, I heard a crash from downstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps walking around below me. Those people were in my house. I heard a set of footsteps walking up the stairs, and I held my breath as they made their way down the hall. I saw the bathroom doorknob turn ever so slightly, followed by a loud bang, like they were trying to kick the door down. That made me lose it. I yelled at the top of my lungs that the police were on their way, and the person on the other side of the door instantly ran back down the stairs. A few seconds later, I heard one of the doors slam, then silence. The police arrived shortly after that, and I told them everything. There wasn't much they could do. I didn't have any cameras, and I wasn't even able to give them any valuable information. The one thing that made them take things a little more seriously was the fact that there was a child involved. According to the police, that kind of involvement suggested whoever these guys were, they weren't just impulsive criminals. They were willing to go way further, and that was the scariest part for me too. I don't like thinking about the poor kid's involvement in the whole thing. Every explanation I came up with is equally sickening. The police told me I was likely the target of a random attack, but the whole scheme was just way too elaborate, in my opinion. Nothing has happened since, though, and I've since moved on with my life. I just really hope that kid is somehow safe, even though I know the odds are slim. It's currently 2024 as I'm writing this. I'm a senior and I'm graduating in a couple weeks. Let me give you all a very brief rant. I never understood how most of my friends could survive a whole week-long spring break trip to Miami or some other party destination. I simply can't. So for every year of college, spring break was an excuse for me to just go home and relax. This past spring break was no different. I'd essentially be going off the grid for a week, taking a break from grueling schoolwork and mindless drama. I was actually really pissed because I had been working on a flawless regrade request for a midterm I had just taken, and my scummy TA denied it for no good reason. But anyway, it was a Monday morning. I didn't really have any plans, just needed to get a workout in, but that was about it. I've always been a morning workout guy. It's the one thing that makes me feel like I have my life together. So even though I was home for spring break and technically had nothing to do, I still set my alarm for 6 a.m. and forced myself out of bed. I figured if I got to the gym early enough, I could beat the rush. By 6:20, I was already dressed, out the door, and on the road. The drive to the gym takes about 15 minutes, mostly back roads through quiet residential neighborhoods. Nothing ever really happens out there. It was definitely a nice place to grow up in, but a little boring once I got older and all my childhood friends started moving on with their lives. I was driving along listening to some YouTube beats when something strange caught my eye. There was an ice cream truck parked along the curb, just sitting there, engine off, no lights. That wouldn't have been weird in the summer, I guess, but this was mid-March. It was still kind of chilly out. All the kids were still in school too. There was no reason for an ice cream truck to be sitting there at 6:30 in the morning. It looked completely out of place. As I drove past the truck, I slowed down just enough to glance through the driver's window. It was empty. By the time I turned the corner and left it behind, I found myself thinking more about it than I should have. I don't know why. The sight just felt a little bizarre. It wasn't just that it was too early in the year for ice cream trucks. It was that I couldn't remember ever even seeing one in my neighborhood at all. Not even when I was a kid. My area just wasn't that kind of place. As weird as the whole thing was, I quickly dismissed it and proceeded with my workout. After the gym, I got a quick bite to eat and headed home, feeling like I'd actually done something with my morning. But as I turned onto the same street from earlier, the ice cream truck was still there, in the same exact spot. That made me pause. I figured someone would have called it in by now. This is the kind of neighborhood where people are really uptight and get twitchy if you park too long in front of their house. That actually reminds me of a time when some grumpy woman gave my friends and I crap for parking in front of her house, even though we were waiting for our other friend who lived right next door. I say that to say that I'm not crazy for expecting someone to have called the police about the truck. Curiosity got the better of me. Instead of heading straight home, I circled around the block to pass the truck again, just to see if someone was inside it now, and someone was. As I drove past the second time, I must have been a little too obvious with how slowly I was driving, because the guy in the front seat locked eyes with me for a few seconds. He looked really off. He had this long, almost cartoonishly pointed nose and a scraggly beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in years. He genuinely looked like someone who lived in his vehicle, and it rubbed me the wrong way. I drove straight home after that. My parents were both at work, so I had the place to myself. I spent the next few hours just killing time. Sometime in the afternoon, I walked down the driveway to check the mail. As I got to the end of the driveway, I glanced down the street and nearly died inside. It was that same ice cream truck from before. It was parked across the street, about 3 houses down. It wasn't facing me, but I had a feeling it wasn't just a coincidence. I didn't move for a second. I just stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had that guy really followed me home? I knew he had. There was no other explanation. I grabbed the mail and walked straight back inside, trying not to make it obvious that I'd seen anything. Once I was upstairs, though, I went to one of the guest bedrooms. There's a window that overlooks the street from a better angle, so I pulled the curtain aside and peeked through. Sure enough, the ice cream truck was still there. I watched it for a few minutes, but nothing happened. I'm not sure what I expected to see, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. Eventually, I had no choice. I didn't have all day to spend staring out a window, so I tried to get some stuff done on my laptop. I couldn't focus, though. Every half hour or so, I'd feel the urge to go back to the guest room and glance out the window. Every time I looked, the ice cream truck was still visible, but it was in a different spot, which meant the driver was intentionally moving around the street for whatever reason. I didn't know whether it was a good idea to call the police or not. I wasn't sure what I'd even say, given that nothing had actually happened. Even now, I wish that I had just done what any normal person would have done and either called the police or tried to ignore the truck, but I was too curious. My older brother is really into bird watching, so I started digging around his room for a set of binoculars I knew was in there somewhere. Eventually, I found them and returned to the guest room. I pulled the curtains aside and looked at the truck through the binoculars. I was not prepared for what I was about to see. Through the driver's side window, I could see that man from earlier, only he wasn't just sitting there. He was looking back at me with a pair of his own binoculars. As soon as he saw me looking, he instantly dropped the binoculars, started the truck, and drove off. I was horrified. That guy had been spying on me and my house for the better part of 3 hours after literally stalking me home. That's when I finally called the police. I didn't even know what I was expecting from it. I just didn't know what else to do. I told them that this ice cream truck had been circling my neighborhood all day, that I'd seen a man inside watching my house through binoculars, and that he drove off the second I looked back. The dispatcher was calm and told me they'd send someone to patrol the area and keep an eye out. She told me it should be relatively easy to spot an ice cream truck given how distinctive they were. Then she hung up. I didn't know what else to do after that. When my parents got home a little while later, I filled them in. They were obviously concerned, but they also told me it probably wasn't worth worrying about anymore. I was pretty tired by then, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. Sometime later, I woke randomly in the middle of the night. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone off my nightstand. It was sometime just after 3 a.m. I sat there in bed, trying to figure out what had woken me up, when I heard it. Music. It was very faint, almost too faint to notice at first. I kept listening, and panic started building inside me when I realized what kind of music it was. The jingle of an ice cream truck. Before I could do anything, something clicked softly against the glass of my bedroom window. I instantly connected the dots. Someone was throwing rocks at my window. That had to be what had woken me up. The music was way too quiet on its own. I sat frozen for a while, staring at the wall across from me. I kept telling myself to look, to just get up and check. But every time I started to move, my body locked up again. Eventually, I forced myself to do it. I crept toward the window and stood to the side of it for a second. On the count of 3, I peeled back the curtain in one fluid motion and looked. The man from earlier was standing in the middle of my front yard, right below my window, and on either side of him, holding his hands, were 2 small children, or at least they looked like children based on how short they were. I really couldn't tell on account of how dark it was. I didn't waste another second. I tried to ignore the pounding in my chest, stepped away from the window, and immediately went to wake up my dad. I had already dialed 911 by the time he went downstairs to have a look around. My dad's a pretty tough guy, so I figured he'd want to handle things himself. Unfortunately, that man had somehow slipped away in the few minutes it took us to get outside. The police arrived a while later. A few days went by and we never heard anything, and I eventually had to go back to school, but my parents promised me they'd be on high alert. That was almost a month ago, and luckily, my parents haven't told me about any strange occurrences since then. The reason I'm writing this now, though, is because my mom called me a few days ago. Apparently, there was a missing persons case that had just gone public in our hometown. 2 6-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, had vanished from a neighborhood about 30 minutes from where we lived. The moment she said it, my mind went straight back to that night, to those 2 small figures standing on either side of the man in my front yard. The whole thing honestly makes me sick. Why would that guy sit in my house for hours and throw rocks at my windows in the middle of the night? And why even go to those lengths if he was involved in something as serious as a kidnapping? Maybe he was worried that I had somehow caught on to what he was doing, but if he had really taken those kids, wouldn't attention be the last thing he'd want? And then there's the kids themselves. I wonder if they were already with him when I first saw the truck that morning, or were they somewhere else? I really can't stop thinking about it. The only explanation I can come up with is the type of person who'd kidnap a child doesn't think like normal people do, which is why that man would risk getting caught just to freak me out. My mom followed up with the police to try and shed some light on the case and our possible connection to it. If anything ever happens, I will send an update. This happened last spring, about 9 months ago. I'm a sales associate for BMW, so my weeks are pretty busy. When I'm not at the dealership, I'm answering my phone. Because of all the phone work involved, sometimes I feel like I have more to do when I'm not at the dealership, as funny as that sounds. Because of the nature of my work, I pretty much have to answer my phone every time it rings, especially when it's an unknown caller. So, as you'd expect, I get a lot of scam calls, but I have no choice but to answer, just in case it's a client or an interested party. One night, sometime after 10 p.m., my phone started ringing. It was a number my phone didn't recognize. Normally, I would have picked up without thinking, but this time I was already in bed halfway through winding down. Something about how late it was just made me let it ring out. They didn't leave a voicemail. I figured if it was important, they'd leave one. But a few minutes later, the same number called again. I sat up and answered it. I was a little irritated, but I still tried to keep my voice polite, just in case it was someone serious. At first, all I heard was static, just this thick, uneven fuzz. I was about to hang up when I caught something underneath it. A voice. I held the phone closer and listened. It was my voice. I was 100% sure of it. That actually made me freeze up a little bit. After a few seconds, I realized it was more than just a recording of my voice. It was a conversation I'd had earlier that day with a client. Just standard stuff, pricing, availability, setting up a test drive. Nothing sensitive, but it was definitely real. It was definitely my voice. I still don't know if it was the right decision, but I instantly hung up the phone. I sat there for a while, just staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. I wasn't panicking, but I definitely wasn't calm either. The best way I can describe what I was feeling was a mix of confusion and unease. My first thought was that maybe it was the client I had talked to earlier. Maybe he had accidentally called me while trying to play back the call or record it for his own notes. I really don't know. It felt like a stretch, but it was the only explanation that didn't immediately spiral into something worse. That didn't really explain why the number was unknown instead of the number he had called from earlier, but it was the best I could come up with. The next morning, I decided to call him back just for my own sanity. He answered right away and seemed totally normal, friendly even. But when I brought up the call from the night before, he had no idea what I was talking about. He sounded genuinely confused. I apologized for the mix-up and hung up, and for whatever reason, I believed him. The rest of the day was normal. I had a few appointments, followed up with some leads, nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't think too much about the call from the night before, but later that night, around the same time, I got another call. The number wasn't saved in my phone again, but it was different from the number that had called me the night before. This time, I answered it immediately. Exactly what I was dreading happened. It was another static-heavy recording of a conversation I had that day with a client. A different client. A whole different conversation entirely. I hung up again without saying anything. That night was when it really started getting to me, because now it felt intentional, and I noticed something else. The recording didn't include the client's voice. It was only me talking, like a one-sided call. I started wondering if someone had been listening in on my conversations and recording me somehow. I didn't sleep very well that night, as I couldn't stop thinking about it, but I didn't know what to do. I never thought I was a paranoid person, but the next week of my life proved me wrong. Every night for a week, the same thing would happen. I'd get a call from a random number and would listen to a staticky recording of a conversation I'd had that day. I started recording the calls myself. I can't even tell you why. I just thought it was the smart thing to do. By the third or fourth night, it started to wear on me. Not just in a creepy, this is weird kind of way. I mean, it started to actually mess with my head. I couldn't relax, I couldn't think. I'd catch myself looking out the window every few minutes, like someone might be standing out there watching me. I started triple locking my front door. Then I started leaving a light on in every room at night. At one point, I even moved a chair in front of my bedroom door. Looking back, it's really hard for me to explain any of these decisions, but my mind was in a very different place during that period. Anytime my phone rang, even during the day, I'd step outside and answer it from the safety of my car, where I could see every angle around me. It sounds crazy now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At one point, I even brought it up with the police. I felt ridiculous doing it, but I figured if someone was monitoring me, I had to at least make some kind of report. The officer I spoke to was polite enough, but I could tell right away they didn't take it seriously. He said they could try looking into the numbers, but unless there was a direct threat or evidence of harassment, there wasn't much they could do. I don't know if they actually tried to trace the calls or just filed it away and forgot about it. Either way, it didn't help. If anything, it made me feel more alone in it. A few days later, though, the calls suddenly stopped. That week of obsessively checking my surroundings and answering calls from my car must have deterred whoever was harassing me. Part of me wanted to believe it was over, but I couldn't relax. If anything, the sudden absence of contact actually caused me to spiral even further into paranoia. My mom is schizophrenic, so I always figured I was predisposed to developing some kind of mental condition, but it was literally happening right before my very eyes. I was becoming one of those reclusive people who think the entire world is spying on them. I ended up getting a brand new personal phone number. It was a massive headache. Switching numbers meant having to reestablish contact with clients, update everything linked to my phone, and risk missing out on people trying to get in touch with me. But I did it anyway. I couldn't shake the feeling that my old number had been compromised somehow. After a few more days of radio silence, the thing I was dreading happened. One night after work, I got another call. It was exactly like the ones before it. I kept my cool, and instead of remaining silent and hanging up, I actually spoke. I said something along the lines of, "I don't know who you are or why you're doing this, but if it's money you want, I've got it." I went on to say that I'd happily pay to be left alone. I gave the person my address and said I'd be willing to meet. And then, for the first time, there was an actual voice on the other end. It sounded like they were using a voice changer. And all they said was, 11 o'clock, before hanging up. I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would I volunteer my address like that? Honestly, I can't answer that question. I was acting irrationally, I know that. But it's impossible for me to explain exactly how my mind was working during that time, so I'm not even gonna bother. The next 4 days were the most traumatic and stressful moments of my life. I'm not sure how much I can even type out without getting too graphic, but here goes. I have a handgun in my house for personal safety. I grabbed it from my room, loaded it, and sat at my kitchen table and waited. I can't even begin to explain all the thoughts that were bouncing around in my head as I sat there. I contemplated a lot of things in those 4 hours. I'd go as far as to say that had it not been for sheer chance, I might not be typing this out right now. Just thinking about that night gives me a sickening feeling. 11 p.m. came and went, and no one showed up. There's no telling what I would have done had they actually showed up. I ended up sleeping at the kitchen table with the gun in my hand. It was by far the worst night of my life, but thankfully, that was the end of it. I never got another mysterious call again, but that didn't change the fact that that person had done irreparable damage to my mental state. It took me a lot of therapy and time off work to recover fully, and I still get chills thinking about how easily I was almost driven to complete madness. I will never have an explanation for what happened to me. I have no idea how that person recorded my conversations or who they even were. I have no idea why they harassed me or why they stopped for that matter. I've since moved out of that house, but there's not much I can do beyond that. If anything, this experience has made me a lot more fearful of the future. I can't help but think that I'm destined to end up just like my mom. Hopefully getting this out there will help me heal in some way.
My name is Ethan, and I'm a photographer. I took a trip last year with my wife to the Colorado mountains for an art project. My wife is also an avid skier, so she talked me into adding skiing into the trip. We had the option to book a room at a ski resort or rent out a private log cabin. The second one seemed more romantic, so I picked that one. Plus, it didn't hurt that it was cheaper. The cabin was nothing luxurious or anything. It was a single floor, 4-room little thing. A 2-person bedroom, a small living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It may have been small, but the actual idea of being secluded in a warm log cabin during a blizzard was amazing. However, the storm was interfering with the cable signal, so we didn't have much to do this one particular evening. It was just starting to get dark out at this point, but there was still a decent amount of light outside, so I thought it would be perfect for getting a few shots and videos in the blizzard for backgrounds and wallpapers. I told my wife I'd be back within 10 minutes and slipped on my boots and coat. The moment I stepped outside and shut the door, I noticed footsteps leading up to the door in the snow that had blown under the wooden awning. I could see the prints doubled, as whoever left them there turned and went the opposite direction. I was freaked the fuck out, but I wasn't about to go inside and scare my wife. I decided to give in to my curiosity and followed the prints to the right side of the cabin. Right away, I noticed that they led to the bedroom window. My heart froze in fear when I saw this. I could see my wife sitting on the bed using her iPad. She noticed me and I waved. She laughed. I continued to follow the footprints around the cabin to the other side. They led to the living room window on the other side. Someone was stalking us, but how long ago was the question? I found myself standing there for a good minute asking myself if I should follow the footprints anymore. For whatever reason, I decided I would. They were now leading away from the cabin. I knew I was following the prints to where this person was going, not coming from, simply by the boot marks. I followed the prints away from the opening and into the trees. That was where I saw him. A man wearing a black coat facing a tree, slouched down looking at the ground. He was still as a statue, and I could see the snow piling up on his hood and shoulders. I froze in my tracks, trying not to make a sound. I would have thought to ask him if he needed help otherwise, but this guy was just standing there not doing anything, like some kind of deranged freak. I started to gradually move backwards without even turning around, making sure this man didn't turn around or notice me. When I got at a visual distance, I turned around and stomped through the snow back to the cabin. When I slammed the door shut, my wife came over to see what was wrong. I saw worry in her eyes. I guess she saw the worry in mine. She knew I saw something, and after a few minutes of harassment, I finally told her what I saw. She immediately started packing her things, telling me we're leaving right away. I told her no, we're not going anywhere. I would not get a refund for leaving early, and I wasn't about to up and leave just because some weird guy was walking around outside. She made a point of locking both locks on the door and making sure all of the windows were sealed shut. For the rest of the night, we read stuff on our iPads. I reviewed the pictures and videos I had taken so far. We turned out the lights early as there wasn't much else to do. What if he's still out there? I remember my wife asking me. There's no way he's still out there, I then assured her. Listening to the wind blowing outside, along with the small flakes of snow hitting the windows, was strangely relaxing, and I knew I'd be able to fall asleep quickly. Except if it wasn't for the knock at the bedroom window. We were both still awake, and we both knew it was a knock from a person. I ushered my wife out of bed and out into the living room without turning on any lights. There was nothing to use as a weapon whatsoever. Our only option was to run before something might happen. I told my wife we'd have to forget our luggage and make a dash for the Jeep. We slipped on our boots and coats in the dark in a matter of seconds, and when we heard a knock at the living room window from the opposite side of our car, we took that opportunity to run. I pressed the unlock button, so grateful I chose to have remote locks on my Wrangler, and we hopped in. The car started with ease, and as soon as the headlights flashed on, the man was standing facing the log cabin on our side now. Not a window, just facing the wall of the cabin in the same position I had seen him in earlier, as if he were hiding his face. We drove to the nearby ski resort without much trouble in the Jeep. We stayed there for the night and went back the next day to the log cabin to collect our things we left behind. He wasn't there. When I was 17 years old and I was home alone, coincidentally on the night that I tried pot for the first time, I experienced the most horrifying moment of my life. It was mid-December, during a late fall snowstorm. I was in my room with some movie on in the background, Mrs. Doubtfire if I recall correctly, though I wasn't paying attention to it. I was trying to figure out how to properly inhale without coughing. I think I spent about half an hour breathing in smoke from that pipe, yet I couldn't even tell if I felt any different. For maybe another 10 minutes I still continued at it, and finally, I felt a little different. It was a new feeling, hard to explain at the time. I felt as if the room around me felt more calming, and I was more attentive to my surroundings, or maybe less attentive, I couldn't really tell. All I know is I felt different. I was excited, I wanted to keep going. Then suddenly I felt as if I heard a sound come from downstairs. I muted my TV and listened. It sounded like there was a tapping noise coming from the front door, like a light knocking. I got nervous that it was my parents or sister, as I didn't know if I'd be noticeably acting differently or if they would be able to pick up on the smell from around the house. I headed downstairs and looked through the peephole, not to find my parents or sister, but a severely underdressed, almost homeless-looking man. To put this into perspective, we don't live in the kind of suburbs that a lot of you most likely live in. We don't exactly live in a completely desolate area either. We have neighbors, but houses are about 200 yards apart from each other, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a decent distance. So on a dark, stormy night like this where we live, with some random dirty-looking man who I'd never seen before standing on my porch, I naturally pretended I wasn't home. I stood there and kept watching through the peephole as the guy stayed put, proceeding to knock on the door again, this time louder. I knew I wasn't going to answer, so I walked back upstairs to my room and shut the door. In a sense, I felt bad, but I would never let a stranger into my house, and I couldn't imagine what else he could have wanted other than to be let in. Time passed as I continued hitting the pipe, getting more adjusted to it and starting to really feel its effects. I felt like my mind was wandering, forgetting I was even laying in my bed, or even in my bedroom for that matter, when there was a loud thud at my window. I jumped up quicker than a mousetrap when I heard it. It sounded like a rock had hit my window. I shut off the TV now, the only source of light in the bedroom. Now it was pitch black. It took me a while to connect this with the man who was at the stoop. He was out there, I was in here. There's nothing he could do to me, I somehow assured myself. However, being high only made me more paranoid and afraid of every little noise. In fact, I seemed to be more alert to every sound, even the small little house noises like random cracks in the walls. Nothing happened after a few minutes, and being in the pitch black darkness kind of tired me out. That, and apparently I just learned that pot puts you to sleep more effectively than sleeping pills. I awoke sometime later, thinking it must have been 3 in the morning, but I looked at the clock and it said it was only 1:45. I had only been asleep for 20 minutes. I sat up thinking I heard something from down in the den. I rubbed my eyes and then remembered the man. My heart started racing again. I was about to get up when I realized something. Across the room, there was something beyond my half-open door. I leaned in and squinted my eyes. There was somebody peering into the room at me from behind the door. I let out the most horrified and gut-wrenching scream possible as the person then emerged from the door and started walking over to my bed in the dark. I just need a warm place to stay. I had no choice but to shove him to the floor when he made it to my bed. It was then that I realized he was a very skinny and weak man. I was able to drag him up and push him to the front door with force. He tried to fight and resist, but he was too weak to do anything. He was crazy. I could see it in his eyes. I shoved him outside and locked the door, and then called the cops. I stayed downstairs where he had broken the glass to get inside, just to make sure he couldn't get back in. When the cops arrived, they found him sitting in my front bushes curled up in a ball. They took him to the station, and he was no longer my problem. So do I feel bad about this today? I guess I do a little. He was undoubtedly crazy, but I don't know how dangerous he was. It was still either way the scariest experience of my life. When I was younger, me and my friends would always have big manhunt games in the snow. This one January night when we were 13 and there was this crazy blizzard going on, we continued our tradition. We had a group of 6 people playing, 3 on each team. The game was more or less tag, but it involved hiding and running to an assigned safe point, which for us was the front stoop. It was fun in the summer, but the snow only made it so much better, what with the snow adding as a hiding and slowing down factor, hunting down footprints, and even using snowballs as weapons to slow down chasers. It was the most fun game of our childhoods. Until this particular year, things turned pretty bad. It was our turn to hide. I'll give you the names of my teammates to make things more easy to follow. Dan and Christian. Dan hopped the fence to someone's backyard on the other side of the block, which wasn't really cheating as we had no limits with this game. Christian jumped on top of my other friend's shed in the backyard and hid behind the sloped roof. I thought I'd be sneaky and started running all around the backyard to create a seemingly endless trail of footprints. When our friends from the other side of the house announced that they were coming, I had to think quickly. I did something that wasn't too pleasant. First, I signaled for Christian atop the roof to run if I were to run myself, and then I hopped in the bushes and lay flat in the snow. 2 of the others entered the backyard and started analyzing the crazy footprint path I created. I knew it would lead to me though, so I had to be ready to run if they got close. They were getting closer to the bushes I was hiding in, so Christian jumped down from the shed into the snow and darted for the front lawn. The 2 chased after him in both directions. I knew the stoop would be guarded right now, so I took this opportunity to better hide myself. I decided to follow Dan's approach and hopped onto the roof of the shed, then over the fence to that backyard on the other side of the block. I didn't see Dan anywhere though. I looked for his footprints, but quickly found some other kind of tracks in the snow. By the fence were a few boot marks from where Dan must have landed, but then quickly the marks turned to a steady trail of something being pushed or dragged through the snow. I followed the trail to the back door of the pitch-black house, and then it stopped. I quickly put 2 and 2 together, and my heart sank. I turned and headed back for the fence to hop over and call for my friend's parents, but about halfway across the yard, I heard the sliding door to the house open, and someone wearing a black coat with a hood covering their face emerged and started stomping over to me. I screamed like a girl as I pulled myself up over the fence, just barely making it before he could grab my legs. All my friends came running into the backyard. Then shortly after, my friend's parents came out the back door. I told them what happened, and the mom phoned the police, while the dad stormed to the other side of the block with a gun and knocked on the door. There was no answer, so he let himself in as we watched. The door was unlocked. He had us wait outside, and within a few minutes, came out with Dan in his arms. He was knocked out. His face looked red and wounded, as if he were hit in the face by a shovel or something. There was no car in the driveway, indicating the guy left when I escaped his yard. He never returned to his house, and I'm pretty sure he's still wanted by police to this day. It just goes to show, anybody out there, even your next door neighbor, may be a predator, just waiting for an opportunity to strike.
I work nights for the sheriff's department in Bergen County. I've been on the force for 2 years. I haven't seen too much craziness, aside from late-night drug arrests, a few robbery calls, and a few assault calls. Northeastern Bergen County is pretty low crime after all, so those are usually the worst calls I deal with. There was this one night that I received a disturbance call to investigate a scream that came from a house nearby. Usually a call like this would mean a domestic dispute, or even just something as harmless as people drinking and being too loud. I arrived to the house though. and I had to confirm twice that it was the correct house because none of the lights were on. There was a car in the driveway though, a blue Toyota Sienna minivan. Someone was home. I went over to knock on the door a few times. The neighbor must have seen my car because he came out and walked over, reporting that he was the one to call the police. He told me he heard a blood-curdling scream from the house, and that the woman who lives there lives alone but occasionally had her boyfriend over, making it slightly more concerning. I tried the doorknob now, which was locked. I then made my way around the house, trying all the windows, which were all locked. All but one of the backyard windows. It was already slid completely up, enough for someone to climb through. This was a red flag considering every other window was closed. I requested backup to the scene, and once I got confirmation, I climbed into the house through the window. I started to flick every light on that I could find in the house, starting in the kitchen and working my way to the living room. And yes, it's advisable for police to turn on the lights when investigating buildings. What you see in TV shows and movies where they leave the lights off is only done for suspense. I called out for the woman, trying to assure her it's okay, police were here. Though at that time, I still didn't know what exactly the situation was, other than she was reported screaming. There was no response no matter how loud I yelled. The first floor was clear, so there was only the upstairs left to check. I wanted to wait for backup to arrive, because I was nervous what I'd find up there, but I'd also not forgive myself if I waited and wasted precious time that I could have used to save this woman from a possible medical emergency. Before going up the stairs, I unlocked the front door for when backup would arrive. I then walked up the carpeted stairs quietly, and as I got halfway up the stairs, I peered over the ledge onto the second floor. There were 4 doors up there. I flicked on the light switch in the hallway and called out one more time. I heard a creak-type sound come from behind one of the doors, so she had to be in there. I opened the door, and it was a bedroom. The light was off, but the light from the hall was plenty to see a woman laying in bed under the covers. I saw the back of her head. I walked over to her to make sure she was okay, but as I was close, I noticed dark stains that soaked the other side of the covers. The side of her I couldn't see from the door. I yanked the covers off the woman and realized it was blood, and she'd been stabbed multiple times, but she was still breathing. I grabbed my walkie and reported a stabbing, requesting immediate backup and an ambulance. The creak I heard moments before suddenly made no sense if this woman was in bed like this. And given she was unconscious, someone placed her in the bed most likely. I did a 360 in place, looking around the room. There was a closet. It was instinctively the first place I'd think to look. I had my gun drawn, and had my hand on the doorknob for 5 seconds, gathering the courage to yank the door open. When I finally did, there was no one inside. I turned around again to look at the bed, at the bleeding woman. Then I thought, the bed. I got on my knees to be level with the bottom of the bed. I yanked the bed wrap covering the bottom of the bed up, and I was then eye to eye with a man wearing a face mask covering the lower half of his face. I shrieked and yelled, "Show me your hands." He slowly raised his hands above his head as much as he could. I got up and told him to get out from under the bed slowly and made sure he wasn't holding the knife. I had him stand in the corner with his hands up until my backup came. I wasn't about to try and handcuff him in there alone, when he could have any weapon on his person. I told backup to meet me upstairs, and when they entered the house, I called up to them. Only then did I place the man under arrest. An ambulance arrived not too long after, and the woman was rushed to the hospital, and she managed to survive being stabbed 6 times. The man who did it was in fact her boyfriend, which I didn't find too surprising, honestly. The man had found out that she cheated on him with his friend, and when he called her about it, she broke up with him over the phone, and this must have caused the man to snap. I'm just very thankful the woman survived. This story was told to me by my best friend's uncle, who works the night shift as a police officer in our city. A year or so ago, Mike, my best friend's uncle, was out on his nightly patrol with his partner Steve. They've been working together for years, and they're both Army veterans, so they're very level-headed and calm people, perfect for being police officers. When they got a call from a landlord at an apartment complex complaining about one of his tenants, they didn't really expect anything bad. They get calls like that all the time, so they headed over to see what was going on. When they arrived, the landlord greeted them outside. It was probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and everyone from the complex was standing out in the grass, which was odd. The landlord approached Mike and Steve and started to rant about one of their neighbors being crazy and turning all of the water on in his apartment. Apparently he was some guy in his 30s and he'd been acting weird lately. Mike could see that there was water seeping out from the front door to the place and decided they had to go in and do a welfare check on the guy. When they walked in, water was pouring down the stairs and clearly flooding the building, which meant that this water had to have been turned on for hours to cause this kind of damage. They climbed to the second story and knocked on the door where the water was gushing out from. The landlord told them that the tenant's name was Adam, and so they pounded on the door calling his name. No one answered for a couple minutes, and so they decided to break the door down. When they did, they spotted Adam standing in his kitchen. All of the sinks, the shower, and the toilet from the bathroom and a hose from outside were gushing water everywhere. Adam was standing there shaking. His eyes were wide like he was terrified to move. "Adam, what's going on? Are you all right?" Mike asked while his partner Steve walked further inside to check everything out. Steve walked into the bathroom to turn off the water and to make sure no one else was in the apartment. Mike slowly approached Adam, who seemed terrified because he was shaking so much. He didn't even look at Mike as he approached. Again, he was asked what was wrong, and he finally stuttered out that there are people in the walls. Mike didn't hear what he was saying at first, but as he got closer, Adam started to hear it over and over, louder and louder. "There are people in the walls," until he was almost screaming it, getting himself worked up. Steve walked into the bedroom next and was clearing the room when he checked the closet and noticed something as he turned on the light. There was a very faint line that ran across the wall. At first he didn't think anything of it, but then he heard what Adam was screaming, and a sinking feeling hit his gut. The more he stared at it, the more he realized that the line was in the shape of a door cut out of the wall. It clearly wasn't meant to be there. Mike was about to lead Adam out of the apartment when Steve suddenly called to him, "You better take a look at this." Mike went into the other room to see Steve pointing his gun at the wall in the bedroom, clearly freaked out. They both approached the door, guns raised, while Adam started to cry in the back room. Steve quickly pulled a piece of wall back, and they both froze when 3 sets of eyes stared back at them. 3 people were pressed together in this tiny space in the wall, their faces painted in weird patterns. Both Steve and Mike ordered them out and handcuffed each one. By that time, backup had arrived and some other police officers got Adam out of there. They led the 3 downstairs and sent them off to jail. Mike and Steve were deeply disturbed by the whole exchange. It was only made worse when a couple months later, they found out that the 3 people on the wall were from some crazy cult out in the woods. They were trying to get Adam to join them. They preyed on him because they knew he had a past history of being mentally unstable. They were trying to scare him. He turned on all the water in an attempt to flush them out of his own home. To this day, Mike and Steve say that this was the most disturbing call they've ever been on. This one time when I was working a 12-hour overnight shift, I went out on a call for a suspicious person walking house to house, knocking on doors, and saying things to people through their doors or to their doorbell cameras. I arrived to the man's house who called it in, and he explained better in person that it was a middle-aged woman with long, wiry hair holding something behind her back, going door to door yelling at people to open up and mumbling to herself. The man who called the police had a Ring doorbell camera, and so he showed me the footage that it caught. The woman came up to the door, looked at the camera for a few minutes, literally, then pressed the button. She started speaking into the mic of the doorbell, and the homeowner started talking back through his phone, starting by asking who she is and what she wants. She kept saying, "Open the door, she needs blood," and would smile and cackle each time she said it. When he threatened to call the police, she laughed and started basically punching the door and trying to remove the Ring doorbell camera from the wall. It wasn't possible to tell if the threat of calling the police is what eventually got her to leave. But when she did, the man saw that she went to the house next door. This was when he actually called 911. The footage was absolutely bone-chilling. It was like a scene from a scary movie, and it wasn't possible to tell what she was holding behind her back because of the creepy way she backed away from the door to the sidewalk, still facing the doorbell camera the entire time. There were 2 or 3 other units on this now, driving around the area trying to find the woman. It was basically a mini manhunt now, and the description being used was possibly armed and dangerous woman. I checked the nearby houses on foot really quickly, then got back in my car and started patrolling the area as well. None of us could find the woman, and then we got a report of a breaking and entering nearby. Someone had called 911 to report that someone had entered their house with a weapon,
and the caller was hiding in their bedroom upstairs. The caller also had a doorbell camera and was able to see the woman entering the house through the front door, but not before looking into the camera for a few moments again. I arrived to the house just about the same time as another unit. Entering the house was easy, as the front door was left unlocked, of course. We had to enter with caution, though, with guns drawn, because we didn't know how dangerous this woman was, or what she could be armed with. As we entered and the foyer was clear, another officer and I shouted that the police were here, and we ordered the intruder to come out with her hands up. Then there was a scream for help from upstairs. My adrenaline was rushing, as it does in any situation like this involving armed suspects. We ran up the stairs and followed the screams for help. They led us to the master bedroom. The husband unlocked and opened the bedroom door as we got upstairs, the husband of the couple sitting and hiding in there. They hadn't left the bedroom since the woman had entered the house, and they said she had been clawing and banging at the door only a few minutes ago, and that they didn't hear her leave, let alone even go down the stairs. We had to check every other room in the upstairs for her, and in one of the corner bedrooms, in the pitch blackness, we heard a cackling sound. Not being able to see her, but to hear her, was downright spine-chilling. I flicked on the light to the bedroom, and she was there sitting on the bed, already looking at me and smiling. She had a huge knife in her hand, and there was blood soaking the bed sheets that she was sitting on. It was her blood. She had just cut one of her wrists. She started saying exactly what she was saying on the first guy's doorbell camera, that she needs blood. We didn't know who she meant, until noticing the little doll sitting between her legs. It was a little girl's doll, covered in the woman's blood. We yelled at her to drop the knife with our guns drawn on her. She just laughed and kept saying what she was saying. There was clearly something very wrong with her, and reasoning with her didn't seem like it would be possible, but we tried anyway. I asked her who is this she keeps referencing, and tried to talk nice to her, saying she doesn't have to hurt herself or anybody else and that we're there to help her. But as she continued to stare at us, mainly at me, and laugh and keep muttering barely understandable sentences, I got increasingly nervous. I had my gun aimed at the giant knife in her hand, contemplating shooting it out of her hand, considering if that was a viable, safe option, but neither of us were expecting what happened next. The crazed woman sprang off the bed and made this growling sound as she was about to lunge at me and presumably attack me, as her knife was raised in the air. I reacted the only way I could in the moment, and I shot at her twice, both times hitting her in the arm, as even though I was still trying to have my sight aimed on the knife, I wasn't expecting her to just jump up suddenly. She dropped the knife and started to scream and cry as she grabbed her arm. We took this moment to subdue her and place her in cuffs. We had to get her an ambulance immediately before she'd bleed out. From the hospital, she'd later be transported to a local jail, and she was later found not guilty on all charges by reason of insanity. She's currently a patient at a mental asylum in my city. The horror that every party involved in this incident had to go through was unimaginable. From all the people who were scared to open their doors, to a crazed woman welding something unknown behind her back, to the couple that actually almost fell victim to her in their own house, to myself and the other officer that were on the scene before she was in custody. It was the scariest experience of my 10 years being a police officer.
For a very brief 2 months, I worked as a delivery driver for the app DoorDash. It was to make some quick money on the side on the weekends. I live in a suburb of Nevada, so deliveries are usually quick and close. Someone made a big order to a local burger joint, and I accepted the delivery. When the food was finished, I loaded it into my car and checked the destination on the app. It was a house across town in a cul-de-sac. I tended to drive quickly over the speed limit to get more deliveries out, aka get more money. When you drive like me though, you're bound to get into some trouble once in a while. And this time, as I was driving up the block towards the cul-de-sac, I saw the sickening glow of the blue and red lights in my rearview mirror. I pulled to the side and got written a ticket for more money than I'd possibly even make that night. It was a horrible feeling that I'd spent my night doing deliveries only to end up losing money. Still, I had to finish this delivery, albeit a bit late now. After the cop got back in his car,
I drove right down towards the cul-de-sac. I got to the house, ran towards the front door, and knocked really hard since there was apparently no doorbell. As I waited for the door to open, I looked around this dark cul-de-sac. I say dark because there weren't any streetlights, only the small amount of light that was given off by the 3 total houses sitting on the street. It was a pretty unusual dead end, not a nice looking spot by any means. The house wasn't exactly the prettiest either. The door finally opened, and an average height bald guy opened the door. He had a grayish beard with brown stains in the middle. His body language and way of behaving was immediately weird, screaming drunk or a drug addict. To top it off, his breath was awful as he said, "How you doing?" in his loud, obnoxious voice. He told me to come in. I told him no, it's okay, as I held out his bag of food, waiting for him to grab it so I could leave. He said, No, come in, I got something for you. I told him, really, it's okay, I need to be on my way. He said something along the lines of not being able to tip me through the app, so he'd have to give me some cash money. Against my better judgment, I entered the house with his food still in my hand. I heard a car pulling up into the cul-de-sac as I stepped inside. As soon as I cleared the door, the man slammed it shut and told me to follow him to the kitchen and to put the food on the table. For some reason, even as uncomfortable as this guy made me, I followed him into his disgusting, messy, smelly kitchen. He went into his basement and told me to wait there in the kitchen. He shut the door and I heard him stomping down his steps. I stood there feeling awkward, but also nervous. There was a short silence, and I stood there looking at my phone, texting a couple friends about what I was experiencing currently. Suddenly, there was a huge crash from down in the basement. It sounded like a big shelf holding a bunch of smaller items toppling over, followed by what was a scream for help. It seemed as though the man was hurt by whatever had fallen down. I ran to the basement door and opened it, and to my surprise, looked down to see nothing but darkness. Not a single light was on. I called down into the basement, "You okay?" I heard the man moaning in apparent pain in the darkness below. I asked where the light switch was. Instead, he just kept saying, "Help." I used the flashlight on my Samsung to start walking down the noisy, creaky stairs. As I got maybe halfway down, the man's moaning sound stopped and it was completely silent. I stopped as I realized how silent it had grown and asked if he was still okay. There was no response. Suddenly, I got a really bad feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. I heard a small cracking sound from in front of the steps, like a pebble being crushed against a concrete floor. Then, there was a loud knocking at the front door upstairs. I turned and ran upstairs to open it, and it was the cop who had pulled me over about 5 minutes ago. He was holding something familiar, 2 folded pieces of paper clipped together, asking me if it was mine. It was, and I grabbed it from him. But I also told him in obvious distress that I thought something strange was going on with this man who I just delivered food to. I told him it sounded like he got injured downstairs, but that it also seemed suspicious. I showed the cop to the basement door, and with his hand on his holster, he called down into the basement. I told him there wasn't a light switch, so he took out his flashlight and started walking down the stairs slowly. I waited at the top of the stairs as he progressed to the bottom step, then disappeared from my view. I didn't wait too long before hearing a commotion downstairs. The cop seemed to be yelling in response to being attacked. The commotion ended with a gunshot. Then there were cries of pain, genuine cries this time. The cop called up to me to come help him get the guy upstairs. He asked me to hold the flashlight as he guided the man who was now cuffed up the stairs. All the while, he was screaming in pain and at the cop. The cop brought him outside and called for an ambulance on his radio. He wanted me to stick around to sign a witness statement. I stuck around for about half an hour before I left and went home. Who would have thought the same cop who wrote me a ticket would potentially save my life 10 minutes later? I occasionally do some deliveries for Postmates, usually late at night after work during the week or on weekends. I use my motorcycle as it allows me to get from point A to point B faster. I was delivering some Mexican food to a guy named Ron. It was a 15-minute drive from the burrito place to Ron's address. When I got to the listed address, I brought the food up the long driveway and up to the front door. I rang the bell and an older woman opened the door. I said delivery for Ronnie, but the woman looked confused and said there's no Ronnie here. I apologized and said I had the wrong house. So I went back to my bike and double-checked the app, making sure I was at the right house. And according to the app, I was. The house number was 15, just like listed on the app. I figured it was time to call this Ron guy to figure out if he had made a mistake with the address. I used the call feature on the app, but after one ring, it went to voicemail. So I tried texting instead, and within seconds, he replied back. I told him the address he gave me was wrong, and he swiftly said, yeah, sorry about that. He explained that he didn't actually live here, but that he was chilling with his friend in the preserve across the street from the house listed on the delivery. He requested I come into the nature preserve by the fire and drop it off there. He mentioned he was sorry about this and was planning on leaving a generous tip. One time before, I did have someone request I drop off their food at a park near their house, so at that moment it didn't seem like the strangest thing in the world. It was just a slight inconvenience, but one that he'd apparently make up for with the tip. The preserve was gated, but there happened to be an opening leading into it right across the street from the house. I followed the dirt trail until the light post ended, and any further I would be walking into complete darkness. I looked around for the light of the fire, and as a matter of fact, I did see a hint of light coming from the woods. I started making my way over into the increasing darkness of the woods, leaving the lit up area. As I got closer, I could confirm it was light from a fire. Why were they in the middle of the woods though? And the question of why they were expecting me to bring it to them out there started to ring in my head. I yelled out Ron's name a few times when I was within yelling distance of the fire. No answer. When I got close enough, I noticed something. There was no one sitting around that campfire. I asked myself, was that the right fire? But that was a silly question. How many fires could there be on a weeknight in the preserve? I walked a little closer to the fire and noticed a tent behind it. Maybe they were in there. So once again, I yelled Ron's name as I approached the tent. It was zipped up. I tapped on the tent and said Ron's name again. So I finally unzipped the tent and knelt down to look inside. I saw someone laying down on their stomach, facing away from me, so that their shoes were only a few inches from my face. They seemed to be asleep. This was getting a bit ridiculous, so I just marked the order as delivered and turned ready to walk away. I didn't even make it a single step before noticing someone standing about 20 feet from me, between two big trees. He called out, "Are you alone?" "No," I said. "My friend is just over there." The guy asked, "Why aren't you alone?" I said I do my deliveries with a partner. He asked, "Where's my food?" I was about to tell him it was in the tent, when I felt two hands grab both my legs and tried pulling me down. I looked down and saw the arms reaching out from the tent. Ron, presumably the guy who I was just talking to, started charging at me. With only maybe 5 seconds to act, I did manage to escape the grasp of the two hands and run past Ron, if that was even his real name. I don't think he chased me after I left the vicinity of the fire. I found my way back to the bike easily, and I drove off without taking a second to look back. I contacted Postmates customer service about it. They told me I should escalate it to the police, as there was nothing they could do. By the time they even responded with that, I didn't even feel up to going through with a police report. I just figured I'd let it go. I got lucky and I was unharmed. Still, it taught me one thing. If your instinct tells you to turn and walk away, do it. For some reason, I never really used any of those food delivery apps until recently, after learning how convenient they are. One night after a late work shift, I didn't have time to make dinner, so I ordered some Chinese food off Postmates. It was originally estimated to be delivered in half an hour, but I waited a lot longer than that. Around the 45-minute mark is when I started getting impatient. I called the Postmate driver, and he picked up after a few rings. I asked him where he was. He asked, "Who is this?" I said, "Tracy, the girl he was delivering food for." There was a short silence. Then he said, "Oh yes, I'm on my way." So I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my living room with the TV on and basically just played around on my phone, dying for the Postmates driver to just show up already. Just then my phone started vibrating, and knowing that it was likely the Postmates driver calling me, I felt very relieved that the food was probably here at last. I picked up and waited for him to say something. I had to say hello like 4 times before he finally started speaking. He said he's outside. I didn't really know how to respond to that, so I said okay and then described my house to him. Then he said something weird. He asked me to come outside to get the food. I opened my front door to check if he was there. He wasn't. I asked him where he was as I stepped out onto the front deck. There was another pause. I looked around my whole front yard and didn't see anyone. I told him I didn't see him. He said, "I see you." Again, I didn't know how to respond, but the way he said it was just so creepy. The last thing he said before I hung up the phone was, "You look really pretty." At that point, I went inside and slammed my door shut and locked it. I opened the Postmates app, and it said my food was delivered. I didn't know what was going on here, but I was growing increasingly uncomfortable. I shut off all the lights in my house and started looking out each window. I started with the living room windows. Didn't see anyone. Then I checked the dining room windows. Nothing. Next, the kitchen. Still no one. So I went down to our den, which was by the back door. I hadn't raised the curtain that morning because of work, so I pulled the string to raise it up. Only a little bit. Just enough to peek under to check the backyard. This whole time I was looking out windows, I don't think I actually expected to see someone. But when I looked under the curtain to the den window, I saw a man sitting in my back patio. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there as if he were waiting for me. I lowered the curtain back down, and then my phone rang. It was the guy again. I picked up, and he immediately said, "I just saw you at the window." All I said to him was, "I'm calling the cops," and I hung up. I went back to the living room and called the cops. The man on the phone said an officer would be over shortly. After I hung up, my phone kept ringing. There was the man. I kept rejecting his calls, but he wouldn't stop. Sitting there waiting for the cops was one of the most tense moments of my life. Eventually, there was a knock at the door, followed by a man shouting, "Police." I jumped off the couch and ran to open the door. I was confused to see not a man in a police uniform, but some man in some dirty street clothes who gave a disturbing smile as soon as we made eye contact. He opened the storm door and tried to get in, but I pushed the front door hard enough to get it shut and lock it. He didn't bang on the door, he didn't scream anything. I think he simply ran off after that. A few minutes later, the actual police showed up, and they searched the property with me. We found the man's phone left on the table in the backyard. The background to the phone was a white guy with a blonde girl, presumably his girlfriend. I note this because the man who was on my stoop was not white, he was Hispanic. I did a little detective work with the cops and came to the conclusion that this man was not originally my Postmates driver, that he had stolen the driver's phone somehow mid-delivery. The police confiscated the phone and left after taking a report. As far as I know, that man never returned to my house, but this was easily the scariest experience of my life. I'm 24 years old, still living with my mom and dad, along with my 2 younger siblings. My parents bought a new house in March, just around the time coronavirus really started to be taken seriously around me, and quarantining started. So we were in the unpacking and settling in phase during all of this. My room is actually in the basement, which I don't mind. It's furthest away from my parents' room. It's technically just an extra room in the house, not really meant to be a bedroom, but we made it one. Plus, my parents figure I'm going to be moving out soon, so why give me one of the better rooms in the house? The basement in this house is huge. It's really cool, and I get to feel like it's kind of my own basement in a way because of my room. But right off the bat moving here, weird things would happen. Inside my room, mostly at night, I'd hear strange sounds inside the walls. I knocked on the wall and it seemed to be hollow. There's a vent in the room. I thought maybe there was an animal in the vents. I used my iPhone flashlight to get a look inside, but I couldn't really see anything. Whatever, house noises, I figured. If it persisted, I would tell my dad to look into it. I set up my Xbox on the basement TV. In fact, I usually just chill in the basement instead of my room. I used the 50-inch TV my dad set up down there. One night on the first week in the house, I was playing Warzone on my Xbox when I heard this distinct sound come from the side of the basement where my room was. It was muffled by a wall, which led me to believe it came from my room. I went to quickly check inside my room, and it was empty. I hurried back to my game so that I wouldn't die, but to best describe the noise I heard, it sounded like a heavy glass object being placed on a table or something. I figured it probably came from upstairs. Literally the next night, I woke to some weird, muffled thumps. I couldn't tell if it was above my room or to the side of my room. I took my phone again and went to the air vents, but once again, even with the light, I couldn't see anything in there. I was starting to worry a small animal might be in the vents or living inside the walls. I brought it to my dad's attention, who told me to let him know if it persisted, and he told me to try to record the sounds if possible. So a few nights later, I woke up at 4 in the morning feeling extremely thirsty. My trusty bedside water bottle was empty that night, so I had to go upstairs to get a refill. On my way back downstairs from the kitchen after refilling the bottle, I stopped mid-staircase in the dark, thinking I heard something from the basement. "Andy?" I said very quietly, wondering if my brother was hiding down there. I whipped out my phone to use the flashlight again as I finished my descent down the stairs. I had a quick look around the basement just for peace of mind, and when I found it was clear, I went back to my room to hit the hay. As I placed my water bottle on the ledge above my bed, something in my gut told me to just look at that little vent in the wall one more time. So I shined the light in that direction, and even though it was only for like half a second, I knew what I saw. There was someone looking through the holes in the vent for just a brief moment. I saw their eyes clear as day, but they moved away just as the light revealed them. What did I do? You probably hope I ran to the vent to get a look inside and see who was in there. But no, instead I screamed like a girl as I ran all the way back upstairs, yelling for my dad like a child. My whole family came down the stairs to my room. I brought them to the vent in my room and shined the light in it again. My dad took a look. Of course, there was no one in sight now. I'm not even lying when I say my mom and dad told me the cliche I was seeing things because I hadn't gotten enough sleep and I was tired. I didn't buy it. I wasn't sleeping there that night. I slept in the living room and locked the basement door that night. The basement door only has a lock on it because we have an outdoor entrance to the basement, so it serves as an extra small layer of security from break-ins, I guess. Well, the next day, when I went down to the basement, I made a shocking discovery. There was some kind of secret door in the wall that was left open. I immediately called my dad down, and we went inside of it together. There was a blanket on the floor of this little hidden room, along with a small wooden stool-like thing. And if you walk down this ever so tiny corridor, you'd come to the vent that peers into my room. This discovery would otherwise be cool, if it didn't lead to the realization that someone has been living in this room, possibly raiding our kitchen, and possibly watching me in my room as I slept. I think when the person living in the room heard the commotion I made the night before, they figured it was time to bail. I just still fear that they may come back. It's April 2020 as I write this, stuck in quarantine. I live in a duplex house. It's one story, but it's divided into two sections. Each side has 2 bedrooms and a kitchen, with each having its own front door. Inside the house, there's a door separating the 2 sections, and it's locked by the other side. The landlord, Jose, lives on the other side, and he has the lock switch on his side of the door. Obviously, that's not exactly a situation I've been entirely comfortable with, so I took it upon myself to install some camera I bought on Amazon. It connects to my phone to alert me when motion is detected, and I aimed it right at that door. But did I ever expect to actually get any kind of notification from that app? No. That's why when I got a notification about movement on the camera, I freaked out. I opened the app and saw in the very laggy, low frame rate video that the door connecting the 2 sides of the house was open. I was literally sitting in my car in a parking lot, heart racing, waiting. A few minutes later, I saw Jose walking through the doorway, and a few seconds later, shutting the door behind him. I was supposed to go shopping, but instead I raced home to check my apartment, but as far as I could tell, nothing was touched. I didn't know whether to confront him or see if it persisted, but the curiosity just ate away at me that night. I knocked on his front door and told him about my camera, and that I knew he entered my apartment. He admitted it right away, but he had a reason. He said he smelt a burning smell that he thought was coming from my side of the house, and he knew I wasn't home, so he had to check if I left the oven on. Given that I couldn't find anything stolen, I had to just say, okay, thanks. I mean, realistically, it was a viable reason for him to come in, right? Still, that night while I was in bed, I wasn't happy about him just coming into my side of the house. I mean, that's against the law, isn't it? Given that we're both always home now makes the situation a little more tense. A few days later, I was up really late on a Zoom call with my friends when I got that dreaded notification on my phone that there was movement. I closed my laptop for like a second to go outside my room. All of my lights were off out there, obviously. It was like 3 a.m. I was in the living room, and I saw Jose standing in the corner. He had something in his hand that I couldn't see, but he was surely looking at me. I could only see him because the light from my bedroom came out to the living room slightly. He started walking to me like a zombie. I told him to chill out as I backed away into my room. When I saw him still approaching me with this lifeless posture, I slammed the door shut and locked it. He started to pound on the door with some blunt object and tried the doorknob. I yelled at him to stop before I called the police. And just like that, he stopped, and a few seconds later, I heard the door separating the apartment slam shut. I peeped into the outside, and he appeared to be gone. I got the police on the phone and had them come to the house. We got Jose to come to my side of the house. He claimed he didn't remember a thing, and as the 4 of us watched the footage on my phone of him entering my side of the apartment, he had this look of fear and remorse. That's when he claimed he has a sleepwalking problem that's gotten worse recently, and he's on a bunch of medications. The police asked me if I wanted to press charges. I looked at Jose and said no. However, as soon as the police left, I barricaded that door with my dresser and started looking for new apartments. I haven't seen Jose since, and I'm not staying here much longer. I don't think I believe his sleepwalking story. It truly seemed he was trying to hurt me that night. Quarantining and social distancing has had my friends and I going crazy, so to spice things up, we wanted to explore the abandoned farmhouse down the road. It was my friends Luke, Kyle, and I. Luke drove us. It was only a 10-minute drive. We pulled up this hilly road onto this enclosed property where this once-occupied farm sits. Most people in the area have passed by this place at least once and are aware of its abandonment. Breaking in was easy. We just broke a window on the ground level and hopped in through there. The place was so old we saw dust particles floating everywhere in the light beams from our flashlights. The most noteworthy things we noticed were the lack of furniture and extremely creaky floors. Even though the place was known to be abandoned, we still expected at least some things left behind. However, it seemed people had already looted the place out. The three of us branched off a bit to different sections of the house to explore, and within a minute, Kyle came tiptoeing back to us and whispered that he heard someone or something in another room. I whispered where, and he pointed. He refused to go over there, while Luke and I just quietly laughed, thinking he was either being a pussy or trying to freak us out. Not gonna lie, given the setting, that dark, quiet old farmhouse surrounded by woods in the dead of night, his claims did give me goosebumps. Luke and I still proceeded quietly to the room that he was pointing at. It was impossible not to make at least a little creaking on those terrible rotting wood floorboards. Then we discovered that the little room contained a two-way staircase, one going upstairs, another going to the basement. But when I approached the basement staircase, my goosebumps came back when I realized most, if not all, of the stairs had collapsed, and at this point, it was more so just a hole in the floor. Luke dared me to look down into the basement. I was going to, then I for sure heard a noise come from down there. It was this creaking sound that would repeat every couple seconds. I turned to Luke and whispered, "Do you hear that?" He nodded his head and whispered back to go look down there. I took a deep breath and said, "To hell with it, I'll do it." I crept to the disturbing-looking hole in the floor and shined my flashlight into the darkness below. At first I didn't see anything except a concrete floor in the basement and small piles of rotted wood. But then I got on my knees to get a deeper look in the basement. And that's when we heard,
"Hello?"
My hand just jerked to the right where I heard the voice, and I saw an old woman with long gray hair in a rocking chair. She was looking at me with this lifeless smile. It had this hint of malice to it. I fell backwards and dropped my flashlight. I yelled at the top of my lungs to run to my friends. Kyle already left the house and was waiting in the car. Luke and I then got to the car, and I was yelling at him the whole time to hurry up. Once we exited the property, I felt a lot better. Luke heard the voice too. He didn't see what I saw though. It was bizarre. It was surreal. It was terrifying. It didn't make sense. Why was she down there? How did she get down there when all the stairs had collapsed? What else was down there? All these unanswered questions are made creepier when you remember that farm has been abandoned for years.
I'll never forget this night. The pizza place I worked at was about to close, and I was getting ready to go home when the phone rang. I was working the counter alone that night, so I was taking calls. I picked up the phone. There was complete silence, so I hung up. About a minute later, the phone rings again, so I pick up again. Still silence. I was about to hang up again when I heard the very weak and cold voice of an old woman on the other end. She said she wanted a regular pie delivered. I remained polite on the phone, but on the inside I was screaming. I just wanted to get home and end my shift. I called out to my boss that somebody is requesting a delivery. He told me I had to go. I was upset at first, but I realized it's another tip, and the old ones usually tip the most, so I decided it was okay. I took down the address and told her it would be there soon, but she had already hung up. I thought that was rude, but I ignored it and yelled to the chef that I needed one regular. My boss told me to just go home after the delivery as the place would be closed, so a little before 10 o'clock, I got in my car and put the address into my GPS. The house was 7 miles away. The GPS took me to the quiet side of town. I arrived to the house. It was a small, one-floor house on a very quiet and empty block. I took the pizza and walked up to the door and rang the doorbell. There were no lights on in the house. I hoped that she hadn't given me the wrong address. I rang the doorbell again. There was still no answer. I was about to give up when I turned my head and saw somebody standing at the window. I got a little freaked out and backed up at first, but I eventually got closer to the window to see the person. It was an old woman, probably in her late 70s. She was just staring at me with a blank expression. I yelled to her through the glass that I had her pizza. She didn't react to what I said, so I screamed it louder. A big smile ran across her face. Not a pleasant, genuine smile. It was a smile that sent chills down my spine. I still remember that exact face she made through the window. I decided that I was freaked out enough and got back to my car and set the pizza in the passenger seat. I had to text my boss about this. I shot him a quick text and started my car, ready to get the hell away. I looked to my right to get one more look, to see the woman standing right outside my passenger side window, giving me the same stare she had given me before. I put my car in drive and floored it down the street, not looking back. My boss never made me do a late night delivery again. This happened 4 years ago when I was still in high school. I was told to do my last delivery of my shift. I got in my car, which was a 1999 Camry, perfect for delivering pizzas. I GPSed the address on my phone. I live upstate in the country, so all pizza deliveries were long drives. I remember the sun was starting to set, so it was probably around 7 o'clock. I'd say after a good 15 minutes of driving through the foresty dirt roads, my GPS said I had arrived. It was an old little cottage-like house made almost entirely of wood. It was sitting all by itself in the middle of absolutely nothing but forest. The lawn was completely unkept, as the grass was almost at knee height. I was used to this kind of thing, so I didn't think much of it. I took the pizza to the front door. There was no doorbell, so I knocked loudly on the door. Within 10 seconds, I heard the sound of footsteps hitting wood on the inside of the house. The footsteps made it to the door and stopped. I started to feel uneasy. I got the feeling that I was being watched. And that's when I noticed there was a peephole in the door. "It's the pizza guy," I called out. I heard a low, harsh-sounding voice on the other side of the door, telling me to bring the pizza out back. I didn't like the idea of going back there. Something didn't seem right. "Are you sure, sir?" I called out. He didn't answer my question. The sound of footsteps didn't move away from the door, so I had the feeling he was still watching me. I almost found myself walking back to my car, but I decided I didn't want any trouble with my boss. The last time I brought a pizza back, he gave me attitude, so I reluctantly walked through the uncut grass and around the small house to the back. I remember there was a shed and a little patio back there. In the patio, there was a table with 4 chairs surrounding it. In one of the chairs, facing away from me, I saw the head of somebody sitting in the seat. I began walking over and said, "Excuse me," but the person didn't even move an inch. "Excuse me," I said again louder. Then from behind me, I heard, "Psst, over here." I turned around to see a man poking his head out from the corner of the house, looking at me with a crazed smile. "Come over here, I want to show you something." I freaked out, turned around and ran around the house in the opposite direction, back to my car, for some reason still holding the pizza. I got in my car, started it, and got away from there. On my way back to the pizzeria, I pulled over to the side of the road and called the police. Eventually, I was informed that there was no sign of anybody having been in that house for a long time. I quit my delivery job a few days after that. I have no idea what would have happened to me had I gone up to that man, but to this day, I still wish I had just turned my head to see who or what was sitting in that patio chair. I was doing late night deliveries during this particular shift. When I worked this job, I lived in the Poconos. It was very rural up there. I often found myself driving down roads surrounded by nothing but trees, just like this night. Only it was dark and foggy this time. Driving down a shortcut to town that I had taken many times before, I slam on the brakes when I see somebody jump out from the bushes onto the road. The sickening bump and thump from the front of the car confirmed that I had hit the person. I put my hand to my forehead, cursing to myself. I couldn't believe what just happened. I just hit a person. I got out of my car and checked to see if they were alright. It was a man wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. He lay motionless by my car tire. I had no idea what to do. At this point, I was panicking. Why the hell was this guy in the middle of nowhere? Why did he jump in front of my car? And then things got weirder. I can hear a scream for help, coming from the woods to the left of me. Somebody was in trouble. I looked at the man I hid with my car. He was still on the ground, motionless. I'd only be gone for a minute, I figured. For whatever stupid reason, I thought it was okay to leave the man behind, to go into the woods. I moved in the direction I heard the scream originally, hoping to hear another, but it was just total silence except for the night creatures making their sounds. "Where are you?" I yelled out. It was at that moment I heard the sound of a foot crushing the leaves on the ground. I turned in the direction of the sound, and even in the dark and foggy weather, I could still make out the figure of somebody hiding behind a tree opposite me. I ran as fast as I could back to my car, looking back constantly to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I got back to my car, the man I had hit was gone. I didn't stick around to wonder where he went. I just got back in my car and proceeded down the road. My heart was racing the whole drive through, but I still ended up delivering the pizza. I got to the house, and when I rang the bell, a middle-aged woman answered. After paying, I noticed that her eyes focused on something behind me, and then she asked me, "They let you guys have delivery partners now?" I was confused and asked her what she meant, and she told me, "You got someone with you in your car." I felt a pain in my stomach as I turned and saw somebody sitting in the backseat of my car. I called the cops using the woman's phone, and they arrived shortly after, but the person in the backseat of my car was already gone. The scariest thing about this whole story, the police found a blood-stained knife on the floor of my car where the man was hiding. This memory still haunts me every day, and I can genuinely tell you, it's painfully scary just to imagine how things could have turned out if I hadn't made the delivery.
A couple weeks ago, my dad came home and pitched me a small job offer. One of his coworkers was going away for a few days and needed somebody he could trust to watch over his house. The reason my dad pitched this to me was because the man's house has a big CCTV system, basically a camera in every room, and then an operating desk where all screens could be watched on a big monitor. And I'm a computer science major, so my dad just always assumes that I know how to work anything technological. The man told my dad that he'd pay me $200 for the 2 days just to watch the house. Whatever that meant. My dad drove me to the house and introduced me to the man, whose name doesn't matter. The man made it seem like he preferred I stay in the upstairs room with the monitors as opposed to roaming the house all day. That was fine with me though. So when I wasn't eating, I was mostly just sitting in that room with the TV on in the background and doing schoolwork on my laptop. Ironically, the thing I was doing the least was keeping an eye on the monitors. Night came. I started wondering where in the house I should sleep, since surprisingly, we hadn't discussed that. So I sat back down at the desk and looked at all the different rooms on the screens to see which rooms had beds or couches. I noticed something I wasn't expecting to notice though. The back screen door was open downstairs. I didn't remember it being open. I looked through each and every camera screen in a panic. In the living room, a closet door was open. This one I knew wasn't open earlier. I texted my dad to call the man and ask him if he came back home. Meanwhile, I continued watching the screen. On the grainy, dark image, a tall person who resembled only a black shadow on the screen stepped out from the closet. I pulled my arms off the desk as I covered my mouth with my hands in shock. As I did this, however, my left elbow pulled some heavy object from the desk onto the floor, creating a big thud. The person in the image very clearly moved their head up to the ceiling as a response to the noise. They went for the stairs, walking up very, very slowly, step by step. Meanwhile, I got a text back from my dad saying, "No, he's not. I just spoke to him half an hour ago. Why?" I got so caught up in my phone texting my dad to send help that I didn't even pay attention to the monitor. There was a knock at the door. I looked at it and then the screens. The first screen I laid my eyes on was the one showing the person outside the door to the room I was in. When I remembered that door had no lock, the only thing I could think to do was jump out the window into the bushes below. I ran halfway down the block and then stopped when my dad called me. I had him call his friend and ask him if he was expecting somebody in the house. The man said he had no relatives or friends who had his key or would ever let themselves into his home. So he called the cops and had them review the footage. I got to watch all of it, and it showed everything. From the moment the intruder broke the glass to the backyard door, to the moment I jumped out the window and him running away shortly after. The intruder was never found. The footage was just too dark to identify his face. One day I agreed to house sit for a friend just for the night. He and his family were going on a short vacation and needed somebody to watch their pets and house. I agreed to do it for a small amount of money. I'd been to his house many times before, so I was familiar with the layout. Nothing eventful happened at all the entire day. I just fed the 2 cats, the fish, and the birds. I went to sleep on the couch in the sunroom because it was my favorite room in their house. It was a tiny room surrounded by windows with a big TV mounted on the wall. I fell asleep with the TV on, but I woke up not long after. I turned it off, and now the room was dark. I tried to go back to sleep, but I thought I heard the sound of the PVC gate closing outside. I thought it might have just been the wind. The room had windows surrounding it in 3 directions, so I was basically looking around in a circle out into the darkness. I sat back down on the couch when I calmed down, but I heard a leaf crunching outside. That's when I knew someone was out there. I took another look outside. There was literally somebody pressed up against the glass to the window behind the couch. They were looking in, but I didn't know if they could see me or not. I yelled as loud as I could at them to fuck off. I'm not a big dude, but whoever this guy was appeared to be, so I wasn't going out there. Shockingly, this didn't scare the person away. In fact, they walked over to the back door and tried the doorknob. I ran to get the phone, and then I yelled into the sunroom, "I'm calling the police." Thankfully, this worked. He ran off. I didn't actually call the cops, though. Instead, I texted my friend just to let him know of an almost break-in. I slept through the night in an upstairs bedroom, locked. The next morning, my friend's family returned to find all of the tires on their sedan that was left behind had been slashed. We speculated that somebody who had it out for their family and knew of the vacation they were taking had some kind of plan to break in. But when that failed, they settled for this. That's just speculation, but still, it's the least terrifying explanation to me. When I was in college, I used to work as a babysitter on the side to make a little extra cash. One day I saw an ad posted in the library that was requesting a house sitter for the weekend and to inquire through phone. I was used to babysitting, but house sitting sounded even better, same thing minus taking care of kids. So I called the number as soon as I got home and spoke with a guy named Chuck. I met him that Friday and he showed me around the house. He and his wife eventually went on their way, and I was left alone in the house. I was given one of the spare upstairs bedrooms. I say one of because there were a few. The house was huge. Nothing out of the ordinary was going on at all for the whole day. It was quite uneventful, and I felt like I was missing out on going out since it was a Friday night. But I kept reminding myself that I'd be making $200 for the whole weekend. Later in the night, I kind of just laid in the guest bed that I'd be sleeping in and watched a movie on demand. I wondered why this couple felt the need to hire somebody to watch their house for the whole weekend. There weren't any pets or anything after all, though it was a very, very nice house, so it seemed the most obvious that they just wanted a sense of security for their house while they were gone. By the time I turned off the TV, I was shot and probably minutes away from falling asleep. But the slight sound of a click, along with a sudden glow in the room, woke me completely. I opened my eyes fully to see light creeping out from under the crack of a door. It took me a second to realize that it was a closet door. I flipped on my side as my heart started beating 200 beats a minute. I pulled the sheets up to my chin and pretended to be asleep. I was certain someone was in that closet, and I was simply too afraid to get out of that bed and make any noises. Words can't describe my fear in that bed, or how with each passing minute I felt more and more like I could possibly die. The closet door opened, I could hear it, but I could not see it as I was facing the opposite way. I closed my eyes and tried my best not to move. The room went dark again as I heard another click, a bit louder this time. The closet door quietly closed in the background, but I didn't hear anything else. I was afraid that whoever it was went back into the closet. I didn't know what to do because they had to have seen me and I didn't want to run for it in fear of being chased. The room was dead silent as I was thinking over my next course of action. Eventually, I decided to just peek over to the other side and make sure the coast was clear. I flipped on my other side. Someone was standing right next to the bed, with their hand reaching towards me. My reaction, I pulled my arms up towards me, balled up and backed up onto the wall in shock. The person stood there showing no signs of leaving. I hopped over the metal bar at the end of the bed, ran for the door, down the stairs, and then out the front door. I ran all the way home, let myself in, called Chuck and explained. I told him it was his problem now and hung up. He tried calling back, but I didn't answer. Maybe there was some story to be told, like they knew this person, or they frequently dealt with break-ins and that's why they needed me. I didn't care though. I didn't even care about the money. I just didn't want to speak to that Chuck guy ever again, or see that house ever again.
Attention, lockdown, lockdown, lock the doors, stay away from the windows.
Back in 2016, my school went into a lockdown. I was in my senior year and it was the last week of school, so everything was kind of chill and laid back at that point. My friend, who we all used to call Moose, was cutting class with me to smoke in my car in the senior parking lot. One of our friends, Mario, who was in the lunchroom, texted me to come chill with him, so Moose and I started walking back to the school. As we were about to enter through one of the discreet back doors of the school by the band and chorus rooms, Mario texted me saying the school was going into lockdown, and he was right. As we entered through the still unlocked back door, we noticed the red lockdown lights flashing in the tiny band hallway. We walked through the empty hall. This was the quieter section of the school with less foot traffic since we were far from the regular classrooms. I was texting Mario asking him what was going on and if it was just a drill. Moose and I stood in the hallway waiting for an answer. My friend Mario texted back saying, "Dude, holy shit," and the 3 dots bubble meaning he was typing sat under his text for like 30 seconds. Then it went away. He didn't send a second text. I sent him 3 question marks. Moose and I didn't really know what to do. The main hallway lights were shut off, and all that lit up the halls were the backup lights and the red flashing lockdown lights. There were no teachers anywhere to tell us what to do,
so we just chilled in the hallway. We tried opening the doors to the auditorium, but they had already been locked. Moose then tapped my shoulder and pointed down the hallway. All the way down, there was someone dressed in black fast approaching, like speed walking down the hall in our direction. At first it looked like a teacher, but as he got closer, we realized he was wearing some kind of white mask. Moose and I started walking backwards instinctively in response to what we now perceived to be a threat. As he got even closer, we could confirm it was a mask on his face. And it was this horrifying, disgusting mask of some pale, rotting-like face. I'd never seen anything so creepy at any Halloween stores or anything. The man was now too close for comfort, and the way he was approaching us was obviously full of aggression. Moose and I turned and started running back towards the band room. We hoped the band teacher, Miss Bryant, would be in there to let us in. We got to the door, which was locked, and started pounding on it, but we didn't have time to wait. Moose and I split up to hide. I hid in one of the music department closets. I don't know where Moose went. I turned the light in the closet off and hid behind a big container. There was a big glass window in the door to the closet, and I could see into the hall thanks to the little light from the backup lights. I heard footsteps approaching from outside, so I ducked my head completely behind the container. I only looked up and peeked at the window after the footsteps had stopped for a while, and I assumed it was clear. But it was not. The footsteps stopped because the man in the mask was standing at the door, looking in through the glass. I ducked back down, hoping he didn't see me, and then the closet door creaked open. It sounded as though he was trying to fiddle for the light switch, couldn't find it, then gave up. I heard footsteps quickly walk away, matching his speed walking pace from just before. I took out my phone to text Moose to see if he was alright, and I saw I had a long text from Mario. He explained that a student was stabbed in the bathroom by some masked man with a blade. Moose also texted me saying he's alright. He ran back outside to his car. I realized that was a good idea. I made sure the coast was clear and booked it for my car as well. I sat in my car in front of the school and watched as cop cars swarmed the place. At least 10 officers entered the building. Moose came to sit in my car with me, and we watched for over half an hour. The school was let out early, with police escorting the kids out, of course. They never even found the masked man in the school. He likely escaped through one of the back doors. There were helicopters searching all day for the man. I'm pretty sure he was never found. I thank my lucky stars I didn't have a similar fate as that kid in the bathroom. I went to a very poor high school in a bad neighborhood. Because of that, we regularly had fire drills and lockdown drills in the case of something happening. During a lockdown, the teacher would turn off the lights and we'd all hide in a corner of the classroom without saying anything. It was a cold day in the third quarter of the school year. The windows were all shut, obviously, but still, my teacher had to stop mid-sentence because we could all hear some kind of shouting outside. Definitely some kind of commotion. My teacher went to the window, looked outside, then opened one of the windows, but the yelling seemed to stop by the time he did. At the same time, the dean started speaking over the loudspeaker and said we were going into a lockdown. My teacher rushed to shut the door and turn off the lights, and we all did our thing, went to the corner of the room. Time seemed to move slow as we were all huddled in that corner. Screams started coming from the hallway. Not the screams of students, but deranged, angry screams from a grown man, familiar to the screaming we briefly heard from outside. Someone dangerous was in the building, clearly. The school I went to didn't have security guards, it was too poor, so literally in a case like this, we'd have to wait for police to arrive. The screams were then accompanied by bangs on a nearby door, another classroom. We could hear the screams of the kids in the room next to us. The banging stopped. The screaming grew closer until it was right outside our door, and then bangs on our classroom door. A couple kids screamed and started to cry. The sick man on the other side of the door banged and banged. He started hitting the glass with his elbow, I think, as he screamed insane things that made no sense to us. Some of it being, "I'm sick of it," and "just stop already." The sickening sound of the small, thin glass window of the door shattering made the reality of the situation sink in even worse. Of course, kids on either side of me were screaming and crying now. Me, I was just sitting there in total shock. The man on the other side of the door stuck his arm into the room through the thin window opening and tried unlocking the door. My teacher took that opportunity to grab a pair of scissors and literally stab the man's arm. The man cried out in pain, banged on the door a few more times even harder now, and started running down the halls, still crying in what was probably a mix of pain and anger. The lockdown was ended a few minutes after police arrived. There had to be at least 6 cop cars outside. And yes, the crazy sicko man was arrested and probably brought to a mental hospital. The man apparently wasn't armed, but he clearly came into the school with intentions of hurting people. Kids, mind you. I went to a school in California. We always had a lockdown drill once a month, but only one time ever was it not a drill. I was in the cafeteria during my lunch period when the teacher, who was in charge of watching the lunchroom, announced over the microphone for everyone to be quiet. He announced to us that the school was going into lockdown and ordered us to be quiet. I think he genuinely scared everyone by how serious and nervous he sounded, because everyone in the cafeteria looked genuinely shook and actually shut up. I looked around the disturbingly quiet cafeteria and could see everyone else was doing the same thing, taking nervous, curious glances at their friends and strangers at other tables. Then shit went down. A gunshot echoed from across the school, and that's when panic set in with everyone. Some kids ran for the exit door. The teacher in charge of the cafeteria yelled at everyone to hide under the tables as he locked the cafeteria doors and shut off the lights. I was sitting under the table with my friends, heart racing, feeling sick, knowing my life could be in danger. Every minute felt like an eternity, just waiting for someone on the intercom to say it's all clear. Then, across the cafeteria, there was a sudden outroar of screams from students, mostly girls, and the sound of tables and chairs being moved or falling over. My friends and I looked out from under the table, and we saw a kid with a gun outside the locked door of the cafeteria. Then I remember hearing gunshots. He was shooting at the glass door. The glass didn't shatter right away. I don't even know if it did at all, but the entire lunchroom cleared out through the 2 side exit doors to the outside. Students of all ages either ran to their cars or off the school property and into the neighborhood streets. I ran in the direction of the front of the school, also the direction of my house. I saw police cars already outside. I think they had just arrived at that point, but I didn't stick around to watch. I got home and told my parents, and my dad turned on the news to see the shooting was already being talked about. Miraculously, only one girl was wounded, and the police somehow apprehended him without killing him. I'm sorry for anyone else who has to go through something like this. Fearing for your life that much is not something anyone should have to go through.
I was 16 in my junior year of high school. I had 9 periods in a school day. 5th period was lunch, and straight from there was my astronomy class. My astronomy class was actually held in one of the 2 basement classrooms of the school. My high school was big, there were 3 floors, and even that wasn't enough to accommodate all the classes offered, so the school built 2 classrooms in the basement. It was honestly kind of creepy down there when nobody else was around. It used to be a janitorial area, however it was remodeled to better resemble a typical hallway. The only thing, there were no intercoms or loudspeakers down in the basement at that time. For that reason, no classes were held down there first period for the morning announcements. Everyone referred to this little section of the basement as the chamber, and everyone always tried to get classes down there just because it was air conditioned and the classes were typically easier. Plus it had its own bathroom down there. We had a quiz in astronomy that day. Usually I was one of the first done just because I found the class easy. After I finished my quiz, I texted my friend who was in the other basement classroom to meet me in the bathroom because I was bored. He told me okay. I walked out of the classroom and down the small hallway to the bathroom. A few seconds later, the door opened and my friend JJ entered the bathroom. We were joking around for a while until JJ checked his phone and said someone texted him saying the school was going on lockdown. We both looked at each other with the same grins. Neither of our teachers saw us leave the classrooms. That meant we had free range of the school while it was on lockdown. We agreed to sneak upstairs and look around the hallways just for the hell of it. The worst that would happen is that we'd explain how we couldn't hear the announcements in the basement classrooms. Upon opening the basement door to the main floor, we were surprised to find all the lights had been turned off, so the hallways were pretty much pitch black aside from the light pouring in from the doors in the lobby. This was legit because usually the lights were left on in the hallways during lockdowns. Something was going down, and we didn't know if we were even comfortable walking around now. JJ stepped out a little further into the hallway, and I followed suit. JJ then looked down the hall and said, "Who's that?" I looked, and emerging from the darkness was a man. At first we couldn't tell if he was a teacher or not, but as he got closer, we realized this guy wasn't dressed at all like any staff member. He was dressed like a bum. "Alright, let's go," I told JJ as we hurried back down to the basement. He surely saw us, whoever he was. We saw both classrooms had their doors shut and lights off, so to avoid making a scene, we decided to hide in the bathroom. I shut the light first thing and then we both went to hide in the corner stall. There was complete silence in the room, no ventilation, no heaters, nothing. Just the sound of me and JJ breathing, and an occasional drip from the sink. The door to the bathroom suddenly opened, and light from the hallway poured into the bathroom for a brief moment. The door shut, and the bathroom was once again pitch black. Me and JJ tried our best to control our breathing. The room was so silent that we could hear somebody walking over to our side of the bathroom. The person stopped and started breathing really heavily, as if they were out of breath. Me and JJ were both scared to death. JJ did something very dumb. He whispered in my ear, "We have to crawl out through the other stalls." The room was so silent, however, that even JJ's whisper could be heard from across the room. The heavy breathing outside the stall stopped, and the person tried pressing the stall door in. That was when I whispered, "Go, go," to JJ. We both crawled under the side wall to the next stall over, and then the next stall, and then finally out to the other side of the bathroom. The person was now full on banging on the stall door. Me and JJ hopped up off the floor, opened the door, and as the light filled the room again, we saw the guy from upstairs in the corner. We pounded on the door to JJ's class. The teacher let us in within seconds. JJ explained everything as the teacher locked the door, mentioning a gun sticking out of the man's pocket. I was shocked to hear this because I didn't see a gun, but I went along with it anyway. Usually a bunch of high school students would be laughing their asses off at two students causing a scene like this, but I noticed all the kids sitting in the corner looked concerned. A sudden bang at the door made everyone jump and a couple of girls squeal out of fear. JJ, the teacher, and I could see the man standing at the door, looking through the window while trying the doorknob. After a few bangs on the door out of what seemed to be anger, he turned and walked down the hallway back to the stairs. We don't know how much longer the lockdown went on for, but for over an hour we sat in silence in the room, other than the teacher occasionally asking me and JJ questions in a very concerned tone, shaking his head after everything we would tell him. Eventually, somebody from upstairs called the teacher and he instructed all of us to single file walk up the stairs and out of the building, where we would be greeted by cops. Me and JJ did the best we could at describing the man to the cops and to the dean. One of the cops patted me on the back and we were sent off to go home. After this incident, the school installed cameras everywhere and ramped up the security budget. This incident never got media attention, so honestly we never found out if police caught the guy.
I'm convinced that man had no other intentions but to kill us then and there in that bathroom stall. I'm a retired New Jersey police officer. Throughout my 20 years in the force, the most disturbing call I ever received was for a school lockdown happening at a nearby middle school, of which I'll leave out the name for legal reasons. It happened on a stormy, dark day. My car number was called on the radio to respond to a lockdown, where a suspicious-looking man was seen stepping out from a white van parked behind a school and walking into the back door by the boys' locker room. I pulled up to the back parking lot of the school, right next to the white van. Nobody was inside and all the doors and trunk were locked. I opened the red back door that entered into the gym hallway, right by the locker rooms. The main lights had been turned off, so the whole inside of the school was dark. I unholstered the flashlight from my belt and used it to navigate the halls. I made it to the lobby of the school, where a woman emerged from the front office quietly, telling me to check the boys' locker room but to be careful because the person might be armed. I called for backup on my radio and was assured backup was already on the way. I made it back to the hallway I entered from, where I found the boys' locker room right next to the exit. I pushed it open very quietly. There were no windows in the rooms, therefore there was no light whatsoever in that locker room. Only the light provided by the flashlight. There was a white noise in the room, some kind of vent on the ceiling blowing air, but even over that, I was hearing faint scratching type noises or little dings on the locker doors from the other side. I was supposed to make my presence as a police officer known, but honestly, I was just too scared. The tension in the room was insane. I held my flashlight in one hand and my gun in the other as I snuck to the other side of the locker room. It seemed like wherever I was in the room, the dings and thuds would be coming from the other side. I was standing in the corner of the locker room, right by the door to the bathroom, when the sound of someone slamming a locker door from another room made me jump out of my skin. I went in the direction where I heard the slam, to find out that it was from the boys' football team locker room. There was no door separating the main locker room from the football locker room. The lockers in here were also 3 times the size. I finally had the nerve to make my presence known by shouting police. After shouting, a kid started screaming help from somewhere in the room. It was very muffled though. The kid pounded on a locker door on the other side of the row I was in. When I found out that the boy was trapped inside of a locker, I felt sick in my stomach. I told him I'd be right back, once again calling for backup while running outside to where the white van was. It was gone. My biggest mistake was not getting the plate number first thing. I told dispatch to be on lookout for a suspicious white van. I ran back into the school and instructed the staff in the front office to end the school day and to send somebody with a key to the locker room to get the boy out of the locker. The boy was held by the man with a knife on his back, as I speculate the man was quietly trying to get the 12-year-old boy to his van. The boy was bleeding on his arm from the man cutting him while resisting. The man's van was spotted a week later in a 7-Eleven parking lot, where he was arrested after being properly identified. I was staying in a Hampton Inn in New Jersey when I was visiting Rowan University, a college I potentially wanted to attend. My family couldn't come with me, so I was on my own. After attending campus tours, I went to get a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant, and then went back to the hotel at around 8 p.m., planning on going back to campus again the next day. About an hour after returning to my room, a strange alarm started going off in my room, along with a white light flashing from the corner of the ceiling. A message started looping shortly after as well, saying something along the lines of, "All Hampton Inn guests, please remain in your rooms, this is a lockdown." I'd never heard of a lockdown in a hotel. I never even knew hotels had alarms like this. I found it more interesting and exciting than anything else. Eventually the sound of the alarm stopped, but the light kept flashing,
and every 20 seconds or so the message would repeat. It was only like 9:30, so I turned on the TV just as background noise while I started changing clothes and brushing my teeth. I shut the lights when I was done and hopped under the covers. I watched TV for half an hour before shutting it off. The light was still flashing with an obnoxious bright white every few seconds. It was definitely going to hinder my sleep. I was starting to consider calling the front desk to ask what was going on, when the phone rang. It was someone from the front desk. I was expecting them to tell me something about the alarm and when it would shut off, but instead the person on the other end spoke in a very concerned voice. She told me to remain calm and walk out the door. I took that opportunity to ask her what exactly was going on. She went on to tell me that there was somebody in the room with me and to get out immediately. I dropped the phone and instinctively started looking around everywhere. Part of me was curious to see if somebody was in fact in the room. I checked under the bed, looked into the empty bathroom, nobody in either spot. Then I noticed the closet door right next to the bathroom. It was one of those closets with a wooden sliding door. It was open just a tiny crack, and through that tiny crack, I could see a person's face. At first it didn't sink in what I was seeing, but when the door slid shut, that was when I freaked out and ran out the door. The people at the front desk showed me security footage from an hour earlier of some sketchy looking man walking around the hallways, apparently looking for a certain room. When he got to my door, he opened it with the card he somehow acquired, and that was it. I stayed around as the authorities took the person out in chains. It was a man, of course, on the shorter side, easily 40s. He looked at me as he passed, as if he knew who I was immediately. It's scary thinking back that he may have been watching me for more than an hour from that closet. I'm currently in a predicament, and quite frankly, I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning. 5 years ago, my next-door neighbor Charlie, or Charles as we call him, informed us of his 14-year-old son's disappearance. He reported it to the police, it was on the news, it was everywhere. Me and my wife felt absolutely awful and always offered to help them out in any way we could. As the years passed with no word of their son, we assumed they eventually came to terms with it, and realized the worst had probably happened. Me and my wife never had the nerve to ask if the body ever turned up. Occasionally Charles and his wife would invite me and my wife over for a barbecue during the warmer months. We noticed neither of the two were ever the same since their son had gone missing. Charles' wife Kathy was always quieter and more reserved, and Charles just seemed more awkward and nervous, both understandable to a certain extent. Fast forward a couple of years later to just last week. Charles came over to me when I was taking out the garbage and asked to borrow a shovel. Without hesitation, I ran to get him my best shovel, not asking why he needed it. He thanked me and said he just had to do some work in his backyard and he'd get it back to me by tomorrow. He then disappeared into his backyard. I went inside, and when I was by one of my upstairs windows that has a clear view into Charlie's backyard, I could see he was digging out a really big hole in the ground. He seemed to be struggling a bit. He's 56 after all. I figured I'd go grab my second shovel and help him out. As I entered his backyard and called his name, he looked up from what he was doing, dropped my shovel, and hurried over to me, saying, No, it's okay, Tim, I got it. Please, just leave." I said, "What's wrong with you? It's not a big deal." Mainly because of his bizarre reaction. He told me I will not allow you to use that shovel in my backyard, and then pointed to the gate as if I were a dog. I was so taken aback by how he was acting that I just left without saying another word. I went upstairs to spy on him through the window. He was digging the hole for at least another half hour. When it finally looked like he was done, he started looking around, like up high at neighboring houses as if to check and make sure nobody was watching. And then, before I could think to hide, he spotted me at my window. All I could do at that point was casually walk away. He's up to something, and I wanted to find out what. I continued to look at his backyard every so often, but he wasn't digging anymore. I figured he knew I was watching now and would wait until it was dark out. And I was exactly right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting the dirt outside. It was too dark to see anything from my window now, so I snuck outside quietly and looked over the fence in the backyard. I could see him digging loud and clear now. When he went inside his house, I took that opportunity to sneak into his backyard and take a look at what was in the hole he was digging. The moonlight alone revealed a small piece of a black garbage bag protruding from the dirt at the bottom of the hole. I looked at his back door and back at the hole. I did this 3 more times, deciding whether or not to see what was in the bag. In the end, I decided to run back to my backyard, and it was a good thing I did because he came back outside seconds later. But he wasn't digging. In fact, he disappeared to the other side of his house and didn't come back. I went back into my house and quietly got back into bed, trying not to wake up my wife. The next day, the first thing I did was look out my window to see that the hole in the ground was completely patched up in Charles' backyard. I also noticed that his SUV was parked in the street now instead of his driveway. I don't know what happened throughout the rest of that night, but I'm disturbed to think that what was at the bottom of that hole might have been his son's body. For all I know, he dug up that hole to remove whatever he had previously buried down there and drive it somewhere else to dump it. This is all speculation, call me crazy if you want. I haven't told anyone, not even my wife. And quite frankly, I don't know what to do. Charles never gave me back my shovel. I'm not going to ask him for it. In fact, he's been avoiding me ever since. And something disturbing happened yesterday. I by coincidence happened to look out my window across to Charlie's house and caught him standing at one of his windows looking into mine. When he saw me, he shut his blinds, and that was in the middle of the day. I have no idea what to do, but I'm honestly terrified. I've lived in 3 houses in my life, 2 with my family and my current house by myself. We lived in the first house for the first 15 years of my life, and the second house the next 7 before I moved out to my current home. This experience happened in my first home when I was 15, within the last few months of my family living in that house. I don't remember my family ever being really friendly with the neighbors. In fact, there were 2 kids living next door with their dad that me and my brother had only talked to maybe once or twice our entire lives. As bizarre as that is, though we did know both of their names, Eric and Todd. One day, me and my brother, who is 5 years younger than me, were outside playing basketball in the driveway. That was when one of the 2 boys next door, Todd, came outside and walked over to us, initiating a conversation. I don't remember what we said to each other quote for quote, but I remember the first thing that he asked us was if it was true that we were moving. As the older brother, I did most, if not all, of the talking. Todd was probably the same age as me. I never actually asked. By the end of the conversation, he invited me to come with he and his brother to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road the next day. I agreed since it was the weekend and I didn't have anything going on anyway. My little brother asked if he could come at the last second, not under the assumption that he was automatically invited as well. Todd said yeah and then walked away. Late the next day, around an hour before dusk, Eric and Todd rang the doorbell. We were quick to answer the door because our parents didn't know that we were going out to shoot BB guns. Walking down the sidewalks with Todd and Eric decked out in camo gear and carrying a duffel bag of BB guns was really strange. The level of seriousness these 2 clearly had in this was really weird to me and my brother, and we kept meeting eyes, holding in our laughter a couple of times because of it. We got to the woods having spoken very few words. I could already tell these 2 were kids of few words. Maybe why we hadn't met them officially until that point. Todd dropped the duffel bag onto the ground and unzipped it, while Eric aggressively snapped a branch off a tree and threw it into the river.
Me and my brother looked at each other again, this time not finding it as funny. Todd pulled out a couple of guns and handed them to me and my brother, and that's when Todd dropped the bomb and told us they were real guns. Eric grabbed a loaded gun from the bag and began firing at trees across the river. When I realized he wasn't joking about the guns being real, I was in a mix of anger and confusion. I grabbed the gun from my brother's hands and placed both of them back in the bag. I told them we weren't comfortable with this and had to leave. Eric stopped firing, and they both looked at us with expressions that seemed half angry. One of the two boys yelled a curse word at us as we were walking away. I always had a feeling these two were bad kids, but this confirmed it. I told my brother not to speak to them anymore for the remainder of our time living there. We told our parents at the dinner table that night that they were really weird kids, but we didn't mention the gun thing. I woke up that night to a breeze of cold air hitting me in the face. My window was open all the way. I felt something hard press up against the back of my head as I was looking out the window, and somebody behind me going, "Shh." Somehow I didn't scream or jump, I just stayed calm. I was able to understand what was going on surprisingly quickly. I heard Todd's voice in a whisper behind my head. He told me if I ever told anybody, especially his dad, about the guns or the visit, he would come back and kill me and my entire family. I replied in a quiet, shaky voice, "Okay." He pushed my head with his gun before leaving through my window. Every night thereafter for months, I would catch either Todd or Eric at a certain window of their house, looking into either my or my brother's room. Their behavior became more and more strange as we got closer to the date of our move. Just a week before we moved, a rock was thrown at my window one night at like 1 a.m. I opened my window and saw Todd aiming a pistol up at the window, and feeling like I was about to die, I dove for the ground, only to hear the two boys crack up in laughter. I heard one of them refer to me as a fucking retard. There were two other instances that week where the two would harass either me or my brother, and ultimately I couldn't think of a more perfect time for us to have moved and gotten out of there. After all these years, neither me nor my brother told anybody about the boys or their threats. All I know is those two boys were trouble, and it was a good thing we got out of there when we did. At the time I'm writing this happened 2 weeks ago. I've always hated just about all of my neighbors. I'm fresh out of college and I'm living on my own, but that comes at a price. I'm living in a really shitty area, the only place I could afford a house. So I'm not bound to have the ideal neighbors. The neighbors on one side always have their music blasting, while the neighbors on the other side are the creepiest people I've ever met in my life. It's two people living next door. One woman in her 60s who's not friendly at all and honestly doesn't seem all there, and a slightly younger woman who has some kind of severe mental disabilities. I have no idea what the relationship is between the two. I would commonly be sitting on my front porch when I'd look over next door and see the older woman holding the younger woman back as she'd be having some kind of freak-out episode. She'd have her arms crossed and she'd quickly rock back and forth while screaming and making noises. Sometimes she'd even look over and point at me and mumble stuff to the other woman. It's quite disturbing, actually. Sometimes I even go inside when I get too uncomfortable. Anyway, it was a night like any other. I had to go to bed early for work in the morning. However, the next door neighbors were making an unusual amount of noise. I could hear the deranged woman screaming and throwing a fit as the older woman yelled in distress. This went on for about an hour and I couldn't take it anymore. I marched over to the house next door and banged on the door. The older woman answered and greeted me with a "What the hell do you want?" I asked as politely as I could to keep the noise down. In response, she raised her eyebrows and tilted her head down, clearly annoyed by my request. Just then, the younger woman entered the living room, screaming "How dare you!" repeatedly. The older woman held her back from approaching me, and then slammed the door in my face. I had no idea what just happened, but I felt like I didn't accomplish what I came there for. I walked back to my bed in defeat. However, I realized they had finally gone silent next door. I was able to get some sleep at last. Well, I woke up, feeling like the night went way too fast. I looked at my clock and saw that it was only 3 in the morning.
My head fell back into the pillow in relief, but pretty soon I thought I could hear something come from downstairs. I got out of my bed and went over to my door just to make sure I wasn't hearing things. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I went back to bed. I woke up once again to a dark room. Only 20 minutes had passed since I'd fallen back asleep. I didn't know what could have woken me up though. And then I heard. I panicked and tried to find my phone on my bedside desk as a source of light, but when I found it, I didn't dare turn the light on. I looked around the dark room in silence, trying to find some kind of dark figure in the room. I looked at every corner of the room, and even though it was so dark, I could tell there wasn't anybody standing there. This time I heard where it was coming from. I turned to the edge of my bed and saw a black shadowy circle-like object right at the edge of the wooden wall of my bed. When the light of my phone revealed that black object to be the face of the deranged woman from next door, she screamed like the lunatic she was. She screamed as if she were a vampire in the light. I screamed as well. I screamed as I clumsily ran for the door and tripped halfway, looking back to see the woman following me. I slammed the bedroom door behind me and ran all the way downstairs, where I locked the door leading to the upstairs. I called the cops as the woman pounded on the door, screaming incomprehensible things. When the cops showed up, I told them the woman lives next door and that she was mentally insane. The older woman from next door came over after hearing all the commotion and spoke with the cops, pleading with them to let her go, but they insisted they had to take her in for at least the night. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges, and as he asked this, the older woman gave me the most evil, hateful stare imaginable. I chose not to press charges, but her stare didn't change. The officers drove the ill woman away, while the older woman continued to stare at me as she walked back to her house. 5 minutes later, I saw her get in her car and drive away. These two still live next to me. I'm seriously considering moving out because the creepy woman next door makes it clear she despises me. And I've concluded that the mentally ill woman is not only terrifying, but dangerous as well.
One of the benefits of my job is that I get to travel all around the world. It's taken me to some amazing destinations like Greece and Italy, although most of the time I stay within the US. A few years ago, my job took me to a mountainous region in the northeastern United States called the Adirondacks. If anyone's familiar with the area, you know what I'm talking about when I say it's beautiful in the fall. The leaves change and it makes the mountains look like you're in a fairy tale or something. It's incredible. Usually, my job pays for a hotel, but this time I wanted to spend some much-needed alone time in the mountains. So I went through Airbnb to find a secluded mountain home for the weekend. I found a beautiful home that was nestled in the trees and had an incredible view that looked down part of a mountain from the back deck. This place was exactly what I was looking for. There were a few trails right by the house that I could jog on in the morning, and as I said, the back deck had an amazing view that I could just sit and relax and take in all the scenic beauty. For privacy reasons, I'm not going to reveal the name of the woman who posted the property on Airbnb. My work obligations were only in the late afternoon and early evening, so I could spend most of my time at the house. I got to the house later on Friday, and I didn't do much except have a few drinks on the deck. I called it an early night. I woke up around 6 a.m. on Saturday and went for a jog on the trails that surround the house. You know that horrible feeling that you have when you're being watched? Well, I had that feeling for my entire jog. I blamed it on the anxiety of just being alone in the wilderness, since I'm technically a city person. After my jog, I took a shower and just hung out around the house for a few hours. I kept hearing weird noises, but once again, I just kept telling myself that it's my anxiety. I was in a wooden cabin up in the mountains. Of course, there were going to be all sorts of noises. I left the house a little after 3:30 in the afternoon and made my way into the town. I met my coworkers at a local restaurant, and we took care of our business. After all of that, we decided to go out for a few drinks, I didn't want to admit it to myself or anyone else, but I was freaked out to go back to the house. I don't know if it was the feeling of being watched and all the strange noises, or if the remote location was just a little too remote for me. Whatever it was, I was happy to take my time getting back. I even offered to have a little after party at the house, but my coworkers decided to turn in a little before 10 p.m. I put the fear beside me and made my way back to the house. I spent the entire drive trying to communicate with the irrational part of my brain that was freaked out. I repeated to myself over and over again that it's just a house, houses make noises, and I'm safe. I'll lock the doors and triple check that I've locked them before I go to bed. I got back to the house at about 10:45. I was relieved how tired I was. Even with all my nerves, I was confident I could fall asleep. I did indeed check all the locks 3 times and then tried to go to bed. I spent the next few hours tossing and turning. I would drift away for a little bit and then hear something outside and be wide awake for 20 minutes. I tried turning on some music with my phone to drown out some of the noise, but the distraction of the music was keeping me awake. It was only a matter of time before I started hearing the noise again, even with the music playing. It was a little after midnight when I decided to go smoke a cigarette and contemplate just leaving early since I was already wide awake. I grabbed my coat, my phone, and my cigs and made my way downstairs. The stairs came out into the living room, and if you turned left at the bottom of the stairs, you would see a large open room that served as a dining room and a kitchen. The back of the room had a sliding door that led to the back deck, which was my current destination. I took one step into the dark room, and I thought I could see a shadow in the kitchen that was causing some of the moonlight from the window to be obstructed. I felt that horrible pit in my stomach turn into a cyclone as I just stood there. I kept telling myself that it was just shadows and it was nothing to fear. I decided to confront my fear and turn the light on, and the image of what I saw is still burned into my brain and is one of the scariest images I've ever seen. Standing in the kitchen, clear as day, was a man. He was probably 6 feet tall, with long, shaggy hair and a thick beard. I would say he was late 30s if I had to guess. There was a brief standoff where neither one of us did or said anything. It couldn't have been longer than 10 or 15 seconds, but that specific moment felt like it lasted hours. He was hunched over a bit and just staring at me. With no notice, the man lunged at me with a full sprint. Thankfully, there was a counter in the middle of the kitchen, so he had to go around the counter, which gave me the time to run back to my room and lock the door. I realized that this is what stupid people do in horror movies, but at that moment, it seemed like the best possible solution. For starters, I didn't think I could make it to the front or back door without getting caught first, and if I was able to escape, I didn't have my keys, and I didn't know if this man had a weapon or something, so I wasn't about to just run aimlessly into the woods. My room seemed like the safest place because I could lock the door, call 911, and just hope that the door's integrity would last until the police showed up. So that's just what I did. I locked the door, ran to the closet, and called the police. I told them the address and to hurry. The woman from this dispatch stayed on the line and told me that someone would be there soon. While I was waiting, the man started to beat on the door. They seemed like violent strikes on the wood of the door. After each strike, he would say the weirdest things, like he kept saying that he loves me and that he's changed. I got a good look at this man in the kitchen, and I knew without a doubt that I had no idea who this guy was. I started yelling back to the man that I didn't know him and that he had the wrong woman, but it was like he couldn't hear me. He just kept yelling about how much he loved me and that he needed me back. I could hear the door starting to break. When I looked, I could see his fist starting to penetrate the wood of the door from him striking it repeatedly. I was so grateful that I heard sirens at this point. I heard several cars pull in, and they came at the perfect time. Just as the man was able to get his entire hand through the door, I heard a loud crash accompanied by the sound of the police yelling at the man. At the same time, I decided to jump out of the bedroom window since it led to a small roof that I figured I could try to scale down. The crash I had heard right before was the police tackling the man to the ground just as he was about to get into the bedroom. I flagged one of the officers from the roof and he helped me get down. The police arrested the man and he continued yelling incoherently as they put him in the back of a squad car. They called the owner of the house, and that's when we finally started to get a few answers. This guy was the ex-fiancé of the woman who owns the house. Apparently, the guy had gone off the grid for a while after a bad breakup. The most disturbing part of all of this was the guy had been living in one of the closets of the house for a few days. Inside the closet, they found a bunch of beer cans and snack foods.
I don't know why he didn't act sooner, but I'm so thankful he didn't, because this could have ended a lot worse for me. If I hadn't decided to get up for a smoke at that moment, this story could have had a much more tragic ending. The police told me that he had a knife from the kitchen inside his belt loop. It made me think to myself, I probably caught him in the act of getting the knife. The owner of the house felt horrible, and last I knew, the man was going to jail, but who knows. It's just so scary for me to think that I checked the lock 3 times, and it didn't even matter because this creep was already in the house. I guess you never know what can happen. This may be the only time in history that going outside for a smoke saved a life. Okay, so this is a weird story. I was freaked out in the moment, but for a while, I thought maybe I was just overreacting. It was almost 2 years ago, and I interviewed for a job that was in another state. It was about a 5-hour drive. Instead of driving home after the interview, my soon-to-be wife suggested that I find an Airbnb to stay at for the night. I'm hopeless when it comes to apps like this, and I have no idea how to find a good place. She downloaded the app for me, found a place that looked nice, and it was only about a 10-minute drive from where the interview was being held. I booked the spot and got myself ready for the interview. The guy who owned the house was really nice. I was messaging him about why I was coming down, and he told me that if I wanted to, I could get into the house early that day so I could get myself ready and prepared for the interview, instead of driving for 5 hours and then going straight into the interview. I thought that was really nice. The owner sent me the code to get in and gave me all the instructions on how to lock the door. Well, it's literally one button, but still good to know since I had never used one of those keypad locks before this. My interview was at 3. I had more than enough time to shower and get myself mentally prepared for the interview. When I plugged in the interview address into the GPS, it said 9 minutes, so I planned on giving myself at least 30 minutes in case I got lost or hit traffic. After the interview, I grabbed some tacos and went back to the house. I thought the interview went well, but of course, I spent the next few hours second-guessing every answer I gave. I tend to do that when I'm nervous. I didn't do much of anything that night except eat, talk to my girl on the phone, and watch a movie. I know all these places are cleaned, but I still find it weird to sleep in someone else's bed. I'm just weird like that. It's why I don't travel a lot or go on vacation. I planned on sleeping on the couch and heading out first thing in the morning. The living room was cozy. It had a big, fluffy wraparound couch that was in front of a fireplace. Above the fireplace was a huge TV. Just to sweeten the deal, the room also had surround sound. I was perfectly content just staying in this room all night and watching movies until I dozed off and went to bed. Around 11 that night, I grabbed a blanket from one of the beds and I threw on Avengers Endgame. I was only about 15 minutes into the movie when I started to fall asleep. That sleep didn't last very long, as I was awoken by the sound of the doorbell. I just laid there for a few minutes and looked around. I didn't know if I was dreaming or if it was the movie or something. Then a few seconds later, the doorbell chimed again. I couldn't believe it. The doorbell was actually ringing. I grabbed my phone and saw that the time said 11:33. I couldn't imagine who would be ringing the doorbell at this hour. My first thought was just to ignore it. Then the bell rang again. Every time it rang, it made my heart basically jump out of my chest. At the 4th ring, I decided I was going to go check it out. I was thinking to myself, what if it were like the police or something? I cautiously made my way to the door, and before opening it, I looked out the front windows that gave me a somewhat view of the person. It was a skinny guy, and he was holding up a small brown bag in his hands. He had his head down and almost looked unresponsive. I went to the door and opened it, but left the screen door shut and locked. The light was dim, so I couldn't get a decent look at the guy. With his head still down, he told me he had my pizza delivery. Clearly, he wasn't holding a pizza. It was a brown paper bag. I politely told him I didn't order a pizza and that he had the wrong address. I shut the door and started heading back to the living room. The doorbell rang again. I marched back to the front door and opened it. Before I could yell "go away" or anything, he just told me again in a bleak and monotone voice that he had my pizza. When I shouted I didn't order a pizza, the guy responded by giving me the address of the house and said the delivery was for this address. I started to shout that it was a mistake and I didn't order pizza, and while I was shouting, I noticed that the guy was grabbing the screen door handle. I know I should have been more freaked out, but I was just annoyed. I slammed the door after yelling at him to go away before I called the police. After I slammed the door, I snuck back to the front window and again crouched down to look at what this guy was doing. He stood there for another minute and walked away. He had a beat-up red sedan of some kind. I couldn't tell what the make was. One of the front headlights was busted. Once I saw him get into the car, I felt a moment of relief. After that ordeal, I was ironically hungry. I grabbed something from the kitchen, and as I was walking back to the living room, I saw lights still shining through the front windows. When I looked outside, this guy was still sitting in the driveway with his one high beam shining through the window. I decided to go upstairs and look out one of the bedroom windows since I would have a much better vantage point. Because the light was so bright, I couldn't see him sitting in the car, but I could see that the car was running. I was still more annoyed than anything else. My two thoughts were either calling the police or going outside and telling this guy to hit the road. I decided that I didn't want to bother the police with something that could be very small and maybe nothing, so instead I'll just go outside and scare the guy into leaving. I threw my shoes on and marched out there like I was an Avenger. When I got to the window of the car, nobody was there. Without thinking, I turned around and ran back to the house, and immediately I locked the door. I even locked the chain on top of the door. I was trying to ask myself why he wouldn't be in the car, but the car was still running. It didn't make sense to me. I grabbed my phone and went upstairs into the bedroom. I tried texting the owner of the house, but I didn't receive a message back from him right away. I continued to look out of the window for several minutes. I contemplated calling the police, but I kept telling myself that this isn't police-worthy and I'm blowing all of this out of proportion. A few minutes later, I looked out the window, and I saw the skinny man get back into his car, and it almost looked like he was coming from the direction of the front door. I watched him finally back out of the driveway, and he appeared to drive down the street and out of sight. I wasn't scared, but I was so on edge that I didn't really sleep. I spent the entire night watching YouTube videos while lying on the floor of the bedroom. At 4 in the morning, I decided to officially get up, shower, and then leave. As I was gathering my things and getting ready to walk out the door, I noticed something horrible. The front door was unlocked and ajar. Because the chain was locked, it wouldn't open any further. I just stood in amazement. I couldn't remember if maybe I left it unlocked by accident after the last incident. I was sure I locked it, but I didn't want to think about the potential alternative. Then it dawned on me that I for sure didn't lock the screen door when I ran inside. As the sun was rising, I made a run for my car just in case, and as I was backing out of the driveway, I noticed on the side of the front porch was the brown paper bag. I ran outside so fast that I didn't even notice it initially. I thought about going to see if anything was inside, but that was a question that, in that moment, I didn't want answered. I drove away, and at the end of the street was a disgusting green house, and in the driveway was an ugly red car with what looked like a broken headlight. It may be a coincidence, but it looked exactly like the car that sat in the driveway the previous night. The owner of the Airbnb messaged me that morning to apologize for missing my message last night and asked how the stay was. I told him about the delivery driver, the car in the driveway, the unlocked door in the morning, and the similar looking red car at the end of the street. He started typing because I could see the dots in the message, and then he never responded after that. I never bothered to look more into the situation until I started telling people the story. When I looked up the house more recently, it's not listed on Airbnb anymore, so I don't know what to think. It was unnerving and a little freaky for sure, but I truly wasn't that scared. I'm more scared now when I think about it because other people seem to think that this was almost some kind of setup. I'm curious to see what people think, if it all could have been just a crazy string of coincidences, or if I was almost a victim of something sinister. Let me start by saying that monsters exist in this world, and they're not ghosts or demons, but very real people who mean you harm. My family still hasn't recovered from the terror we experienced last summer, and I'm worried they may never fully heal. I'll start at the beginning and do my best to tell the story. My wife and I decided to take the kids on a small family vacation. Nothing crazy, just a few nights away at the ocean. I was surprised to see that finding houses on Airbnb was cheaper than the hotels that were available. My wife found this awesome place that wasn't right on the ocean, but it was only a 5-minute walk, and it was way cheaper than staying on the ocean. The house was directly at the back of a dead-end street, and behind the house was a creek, so it felt very private, which was cool.
We got to the beach town in the mid-afternoon, and we spent several hours at the beach before heading to the house. My son was 8 and my daughter was 13, and usually they fight constantly, but something about being at the ocean caused them to play together like good siblings. This would probably be the highlight of the trip because things started going downhill after that. We got to the house at 5 and unpacked our bags. The kiddos claimed their rooms, and we all got cleaned up from the beach. My wife brought a bunch of meals to cook instead of us having to go out every night. She loves to cook, which I love. There really is nothing better than a home-cooked meal. The deal is, she cooks and I do the dishes. It seems like a fair trade-off. That night, we stayed up for a few hours and played Uno, and then we eventually went to bed. I slept like a baby that night. I wish I could have said the same thing about my son. The next morning, he looked exhausted at breakfast. The poor kid barely touched his food. When I asked him what was wrong, he just put his head down and didn't say anything. He almost looked embarrassed. After a little bit of prying, he finally caved in and told me what was wrong. He claimed that he saw ghosts the previous night. Yes, you heard me correctly. My 8-year-old son claimed to have seen ghosts. When I asked him to explain more, he told me that he saw the shadows move around in the backyard. He looked out the window and saw several shadows come up to the house and disappear for a while, then eventually go back into the tree line, which was right before the creek. He said one of the shadows even turned around at one point and waved at him. The poor kid was in tears while he was telling me. Whatever he saw, or whatever he thought he saw, it clearly freaked him out. My wife and I, and even my daughter, were giving him the ghosts aren't real talk. It took a little while, but he finally started acting like himself again. We went to the beach that day and had another fun day together, hitting waves and building sandcastles. When we got back to the house, I noticed that the door wasn't locked. I asked my wife if she had locked it, and she wasn't sure. I'm compulsive about locking the door, and unfortunately, she isn't. I would have been more annoyed, but anything of value that we had was with me, and after a little walk around the house, nothing looked out of place. Another evening of cooking and card games, and then the kids went to bed around 10 p.m. My wife and I stayed up for a little bit longer and had a few drinks. I didn't look at the exact time, but I would say it was nearly midnight when my son knocked on our bedroom door. He could barely talk, and the poor kid was trembling. He said the ghosts are back, and they're in the backyard again. I sprang up and looked out all the windows, and I didn't see anything. I kept asking him to point them out, but he was too scared to even look out the window. The only thing that was admittedly a little weird was that the backyard floodlight was on, but that could have been set off by anything like the wind or even an animal. I spent the next few minutes trying to comfort him and tell him everything was okay. When he finally spoke, he barely got the words out. He said one of the ghosts tapped on his window. He told him that if he screamed, he would hurt his entire family. According to my son, he asked the ghost to leave him alone, and apparently, the ghost said he'd leave him alone if he opened the door. Instead of opening the door, my son came to wake us up. I was scared, but not because I thought ghosts were real, rather because something was clearly terrifying my poor son. I was thinking maybe my daughter showed him a movie or something that he wasn't supposed to see, or maybe he was just homesick, since he hadn't traveled much as a family. That night, he slept with us, and I didn't sleep very well because I could feel him shaking all night. The kid was truly scared out of his mind. At breakfast, it was the same as the day before. He barely touched his food, and he looked like he was about to collapse into his scrambled eggs. I pitched an idea to him and the rest of the family. I proposed that we have a camp out in the living room. We can make a fort and we'll all sleep together. It'll be like a family sleepover or something. The kids loved it, especially my son. If he was going to see the ghosts tonight, at least I'd be there with him. We played games for a while, but eventually we all fell asleep. At 2:30 in the morning, my son was shaking me awake and said that the ghosts were outside. I got up expecting to see nothing, and I couldn't be more wrong. At the sliding door were 3 hooded figures wearing these creepy black masks with these bulging white eyes. They almost looked like golf balls. I shouted some kind of nonsense out of fear, and that woke up my wife and daughter. As soon as they saw the masked figures, they started to scream and shout. During all the commotion, I saw one figure trying to open the sliding door, but thankfully it was locked. My daughter, thinking quickly on her feet, called 911.
I grabbed a big walking stick that was inside the house and approached the door. I realized that if they had real weapons, the walking stick would be useless, but I was in fight or flight mode and I had to protect my family. I started yelling at them to leave my family alone, and they looked like they were taunting me, almost like they were enjoying the mental pain they were putting my family through. The person on the left side of the door pulled out what looked like a knife and started waving it back and forth. My family was in tears and continued screaming for their lives. I'll never forget those horrible screams. And then, out of nowhere, almost like a scene from a movie, I saw the person at the end get tackled by a police officer. The other two sprinted away, but didn't get very far, as they were also caught by the local police force. They were arrested, and when I saw the faces under the masks, I was almost more afraid. There were 3 young men, just normal-looking guys. I found out months later that 2 of the men were 20, and one of them was 18. My son thought these 3 masked men were ghosts because it was dark and they were dressed in all black. When they were apprehended, I was informed that all 3 of them had a knife on them, not just the one guy who showed his knife. I'm convinced these random young men were targeting us specifically, considering they kept coming back. After talking extensively with local law enforcement, apparently there's a group of punks in the area that target tourists, especially tourists with families. I guess they assume that tourists with families have more money, and when they have kids, they're easier targets. The police weren't overly concerned, which made me fear that this happens all too often. It makes me sad and angry that these types of people exist in the world. You hear stories like this all over the internet, but you never think it could happen to you, especially on vacation. The police seem to think that they wouldn't have physically harmed us and they only wanted our money, but no one knows what they were capable of doing if they were able to get through that sliding door. Not to mention, the mental scars we got from this trip will last a lifetime. Sometimes the mental scars are much more painful than the physical ones. I don't actually know what became of these men, and thankfully I'll never find out, because I will never be returning to that Airbnb or that beach town for the rest of my life. When I was a little younger, I enjoyed off-road biking, like on bike trails in the woods. Living in rural Massachusetts, I always did a lot of exploring, usually on my bike. One of those many days that I was feeling adventurous, I got on my bike and rode down Irving Street, the road my parents' old house sat on. This road went a long way down, and it basically just ran through trees in all directions, with the occasional farmland. I'd usually cut off this road onto an intersecting road, or I'd just ride into the woods through one of the dirt paths. This particular day, I kept going further than usual on Irving Street, hoping to find these cool bike trails one of my friends told me about a few days prior. He said the entrance would be a little past a deer crossing sign. I didn't find the sign though, but I did find a trail that veered off the road into the woods. It was wide enough to easily navigate on my bike. So I turned off Irving Street and onto the dirt trail, which immediately dropped to a decline, allowing me to instantly pick up speed. I still don't know if these were the trails my friend was actually talking about or not, but they were fun to ride on, as they were very hilly and windy. I just rode around the apparent maze of trails, having fun exploring, until I started to get thirsty and realized I had forgotten my water bottle at home. Of course. So I decided to cut my bike ride short and start looking for the way back to the road. I rode around the trails trying to remember which way I came from, but it was literally a maze. Irving Street was a very quiet road, so hoping to hear the sound of traffic was kind of pointless. This was back when flip phones were a thing, and I didn't even have a cell phone yet, honestly, so I couldn't exactly just whip out my iPhone to look for directions. Then I realized I wasn't alone in the woods. There was a woman not too far away from me, just standing there watching me, kinda creepily. She was older, probably 60s. I called out to her asking for help because I'm lost. She replied in a low voice, yet I could somehow make out what she said. She said, "You shouldn't be in here." I apologized and asked for directions one more time, but she said, "Get out now," in a disturbingly sadistic way. I wasn't staying there another second. I rode off down the trail, resuming trying to find the road again. But from that moment forward, every 5 minutes or so, I'd see that lady, not too far away, always looking at me. This went on for some time, to the point that I got so uncomfortable that I hid behind this giant stone for a while once I lost sight of her. I waited for a long time, and it was getting dark quickly. I swear I was starting to freak out. Another half hour of trying to navigate this maze, and it was getting too dark to even make my way around on the bike. I could barely see the trails now. I was so tired I had to sit and take a breather, but something in my gut told me I was being watched. Like, you ever just get that feeling that you can sense the presence of someone else around you? I was right, because the old woman's voice broke the silence. She said, "Come here," but in a low voice, almost a whisper. This meant she was currently closer to me than I was comfortable with. I couldn't see a thing. I held myself together until she started making these cackling sounds. And that's when I lost it. I threw my bike to the floor. That was the last time I ever saw it. I started screaming, running through the woods. The nightmare of trying to find my way out of the woods finally ended when I saw the lights from a house not too far away. I ran as fast as I could to it and rang the doorbell. An older man answered the door and asked him for help, for some water and a ride or something. Thankfully, he was nice and happily offered to give me a ride to my house. He seemed particularly freaked out when I told him about the creepy woman in the woods. He said 3 people had gone missing in our county just that month alone. He also knew the trails I was talking about and said they were not privately owned by any woman, making the situation even weirder. I of course was furious about leaving my bike behind, but I had to get out of there. That woman had been stalking me riding on my bike for potentially hours. She was basically right in front of me in that pitch blackness.
Browsing the app Letgo one day, I came across a listing for a free bike. It was a black Trek brand bike, which is a top bicycle brand. At the time, my bike was an old piece of crap Schwinn that I hadn't used in years, so obviously this listing caught my eye. I contacted the lister, asking for more details, like if the bike was actually free, and where and when would I be able to pick it up. The lister responded relatively quickly, saying yes, it's for free, and said first come, first serve, but to hurry because a lot of people were contacting him. I asked him for the location or address, and he sent me coordinates. That should have been my first red flag. Who sends coordinates? I asked him, how am I supposed to track the coordinates? He said download an app on my phone. Then I asked, is there a nearby address you could just give me? He said not really, because he was keeping his address to himself for privacy reasons, and there weren't really any nearby notable locations. So he gave me a phone number to text him, told me his name was Gene, and we set a meet time of 6 p.m., as that worked for both of our schedules. I downloaded this GPS coordinates tracker app, and the coordinates led me on a 25-minute drive. As I got closer and there was nothing but woods on either side of me, I started to wonder where exactly these coordinates would be taking me. I was now 2 minutes away, and it seemed I was as far as I was going to get with my car. Exactly what I was worried about came true. I'd have to cut through the woods to get to these coordinates. I parked my car on the side of the road, but before heading into the woods like a clueless madman, I texted Gene saying I was parked on the side of a desolate road next to woods on either side, and that the app was pointing me in the direction of the woods. He replied back a minute later saying, yeah, this area is sketchy that way. It would probably be better if you just cut through the woods instead of looking for the trail. If you follow the direction it tells you, you'll find a huge clearing in the woods where I'm waiting with the bike. I already drove this far. I figured I might as well just see this through, even if I was finding this increasingly bizarre. I started my way into the woods, swiping twigs and leaves out of my way as I did my best to make it through the thick woods. I wasn't dressed for this at all, though. I did this for probably 4 minutes until I saw I was approaching the coordinates on my phone, but I didn't see any clearing in the woods ahead of me. Something wasn't right, so before going any further, I texted Gene again, saying I'm just about to be there, but can't see the clearing in the woods. I said maybe I have the wrong coordinates. A minute passed without an answer, so I tried to call him, but it went to voicemail after 1 ring. Then he texted back saying, I have bad service, I can't talk on the phone. I asked him where should I go, I think I'm lost. He didn't answer. I waited and waited, hoping he would, but nothing. After a couple more minutes, I called it quits. I started to feel like this was all fake from the start, and I was becoming paranoid of my surroundings. The sun was going down, so I hurried back in the direction I came. I thought I would be followed, but as I looked back behind me constantly, I didn't see anyone.
I made it back to my car to make a shocking discovery. All 4 of my tires were slashed. My body entered a fight or flight mode before even seeing who did this. I approached the door of the car, wondering if I should hide inside and lock the door, but as I looked into the car, I could see someone laying on the back floor hiding. I chose my flight response. I sprinted all the way down the road, saying screw the piece of crap car. I heard my car door open and slam shut. When I turned around, I just briefly saw someone running into the woods. I took out my phone and of course called 911, asking them to please hurry to my location that I'd be running down the road. 15 minutes or so later, a police car finally approached me with its lights on. They escorted me back to the scene of the crime, my car, and took a police report, which included every detail like the slashed tires and the text conversation. They accompanied me as I waited for my roadside assistance company to come and tow my car. I was brought safely to a shop where they changed my tires on the spot. The only thing I worried about was that man Gene getting my license plate number and possibly tracking me with it, but to this day he hasn't, so I like to think I'm safe from that. When I was a teenager, before my friends and I had our driver's licenses, our main means of transportation was our bikes. Our town isn't that big, and all of us live a short bike ride away conveniently. We'd often go for bike rides during the day, just around the neighborhood for fun, but we really liked going for bike rides at night, especially in the town area on Main Street by the bars and hubbub. It was a Friday night, pretty late, probably approaching midnight. I biked to Main Street with my friends Jackson and Roddy. It was a 15-minute bike ride from us. There were still some people out walking around down the street. Of course, we were only like 15 or 16, so we weren't actually going into any bars, just riding around for the vibe. We hung out in one of the parking lots on the street that we'd often just chill at. At that hour, there weren't many cars left in the parking lot. It was quieting down for the night. Roddy was the one to notice when a car pulled into the lot with its lights off and kind of parked conspicuously, in a way that it was facing us. After a few minutes, Jackson pointed out that he was pretty sure the guy in the car looked like he was watching us, so we started to migrate our hangout elsewhere. We biked out the exit of the parking lot and back onto Main Street, and the car also left the parking lot shortly after us. We all knew just by a single glance at each other, and didn't even have to speak a single word to know to start pedaling fast down the road. The car trailed us, but not too close behind. The driver must have somehow thought we weren't aware of it. He still had his lights off, not to mention. I said let's get to my house instead of just aimlessly biking around trying to lose him in the streets. My house was the closest. It took us only like 5 minutes to get there. Before the car could turn the corner onto my street, we hurried to my backyard gate and rushed inside before he could see. We entered my house through the back door. My dad was still awake, surprisingly, in the living room. He was watching a movie. We all asked him if he could check outside if the car was anywhere out there. He stepped outside for a second, then came back inside saying the coast was clear. He said we were smart to bike away as soon as we were suspicious. Anyway, my dad went to bed after his movie, and usually he wanted my friends out by that point, so Jackson and Roddy left on their bikes. I swear it wasn't even 20 minutes later that I got out of my bed after hearing something from the backyard. I went to my window and looked down to the backyard. I lifted my window up a little more, very quietly, just to better hear the sound. It was like this little clicking, rustling sound that would repeat every 4 seconds. I stuck my head out the window, and I saw the shed door was open, but that didn't answer what that clicking sound was. I went to my dad's room and woke him up. He came with me first to my room where I showed him the shed door, and then made him listen for the sounds. But now the sounds had stopped. The two of us rushed downstairs to the back door, where we flicked on the backyard light. My dad yanked the back door open and stormed into the yard, yelling for whoever was out there to come out. I worried about him going in the shed alone, so I came with him. But besides all the tools and other basic shed equipment, bikes and other shit like that, there was no one hiding in there. We found out on the way back inside the house that the clicking sounds I was hearing was someone trying to tamper with the outside lock, as the entire door handle was completely scraped up and almost ruined. The lock still worked, and that was only the storm door. There was still another door with a working lock behind it, so it was still safe. My dad told me to just go to bed. He'd stay downstairs for the night and keep the outside lights on. He said he had the police come the next morning before I woke up. I'm 99% sure it was that man who followed us in the car. I don't know for sure how or when he found out where I lived. and I'm not sure why he gave up on busting the lock. Anything I say would just be a guess.